Part 31. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 304. Frankly speaking, although Musian knew that the original witch's obsession had more or less affected Wei Mengru's character since she entered her body, she still didn't expect that the other party would accompany him when talking to the disciples in the jade slips. Play some fun games. A closed room, flickering candlelight, and the senior sister's voice coming from the jade slips placed on the table from time to time. And the excited look in Wei Mengru's glance. Although this is one of the scenes that Musian has been looking forward to in the past, it still makes people feel an inexplicable sense of pleasure when they really feel the warmth in her arms and the look of disgust when they play with you. It should be said that she is indeed Musian's favorite maid. Once she awakens some little devil's character, she is simply amazing. However, due to limited time, they were unable to complete the sacred spiritual energy exchange ceremony so early, but at least they did everything else they could do. Under Musian's satisfied gaze, Wei Mengru tied the thin ribbon that had just fallen to the ground around her waist that could only be grasped, gathered up her slightly messy hair, and then walked to the dressing table and took it from there. He took out a piece of rouge from the ring and took a bite gently against the bronze mirror. Musian walked behind her and wrapped his hands around Wei Mengru's delicate body from behind, feeling the unique sweet fragrance of the maid and the softness of her figure. Wei Mengru closed her legs slightly, her body stiffened slightly, and then she gently opened Musian's dog's paw. Musian didn't seem to care and said with a smile, "When did Sister Mengru know so much? Could it be Ruoxi who taught you?" Wei Mengru turned around, straightened Musian's messy collar, and said calmly, "No matter what, I would never ask her such a thing. There was a lot of relevant content in the book I read before. The first half of the book covers how to control your husband, and the second half is mostly about how to let people experience special pleasure. The so-called pleasure refers to those things you just did for me," Musian asked tentatively. Wei Mengru was silent for a while and said, "I only read the second half." The maid is still a little cautious, and her words are a bit like expressing they all want to control you, but I am the only one who knows how to feel sorry for the master. Musian lowered his head and looked at Wei Mengru, raising her hand to carefully smooth his hair. At this moment, he suddenly felt the urge to push her to the bed and continue. Just imagine, a maid who usually despises you is lying on the bed, looking at you with disgust and a shy blush on her face. Just thinking about it makes people excited. Wei Mengru seemed to have noticed Musian's imminent move. She pursed her lips, stood on her tiptoes slightly, leaned close to his ear, and whispered softly, "Let's wait until next time. It's time for you to go to the appointment." The tantalizing soft voice combined with the maid's unique fragrance made Musian's eyes fall on her involuntarily at this moment, and he pondered for a few seconds, "Are you Sister Mengru or the original witch?" Wei Mengru raised the corner of her mouth slightly, "What do you think?" She turned around and walked around Musian, gently opened the door, and finally glanced sideways at Musian. "You are not going to sacrifice your body to exchange with the people in Yuzhou, are you?" "I think people must want to sacrifice." Musian shook his head helplessly. "Your natural furnace cauldron can barely be absorbed by the Hedeo realm now. If you enter the return to the Void realm in the future, who knows whether it will be of use in the Hedeo realm." Wei Mengru said lightly, "If I were Luo Ten, if I learn that you are a natural furnace cauldron, I will sacrifice some resources to exchange with you and bring you back to Yuzhou to cultivate you slowly." "You are not Luo Ten, but you are the original witch," Musian said with a smile. "If Sister Mengru is willing to support me, I would be very happy." Wei Mengru hesitated for a moment, her eyes slightly enlightened. "Speaking of which, she was originally the former owner of World C. If Yuzhou could exchange elixirs with Musian, wouldn't the same be true for her? Although there are still many doubts about the original witch, the identity of the original witch can now be determined." Wei Mengru took a deep look at her young master, then turned into a black shadow and disappeared at the door of the room. The evening breeze blew outside, and the courtyard felt a little lonely. Musian took out the letter from Naja and looked at it again. Finally, he made up his mind, got up and left the room. In any case, Yuzhou is a holy land for alchemists. Even if you can't get the concentration pill, it will be a worthwhile trip if you can make good friends with him. Today's Liangyi sect is obviously much more lively than in the past, and the reason for this is that the seal of the pilgrimage hall and the appearance of several powerful men have ignited the fighting spirit of many disciples. After Musian left Tianhe Garden, Yu Jian flew in the direction of the South Bank. In Liangyi sect, the South Bank and North Bank cover a huge area. If you don't fly with a sword, you may not be able to reach them in half a day. On the one hand, this is because of its vast territory, and on the other hand, it is also because of the many complex halls and caves arranged here. The sect guests on this trip all live in the South Bank. I don't know what happened tonight. Few people passed by the South Bank, and white mist enveloped the entire South Bank. Musian had just arrived at the gate of the South Bank when he heard the sound of quarreling in front of a hall in the distance. This was a rare thing for Liangyi sect, because this was a world of immortals, and most of the cultivators held the idea that a Taoist partner would only hinder my cultivation speed. Of course, most people simply didn't know how to pursue female cultivators, so whenever they saw someone with a Taoist partner or a wealthy nobleman like Musian, they looked down on him on the surface, but in fact they felt so sour that they wanted to eat a lemon. Junior sister, listen to me, there must be something good in the pilgrimage hall. If you can persuade your master to give you the token, we can share the good things equally. Brother, why do you think that I must have a way to get the first seed token that you can't get? You are the master's favorite person. If you ask for it, there must be a way, I can lead the way for you for free. If you find good things in the pilgrimage hall, all of them belong to you. Manting, I am sincere to you, believe me. Brother, you are really affectionate, but why do I remember that you had unclear relationships with 3 or 4 female cultivators before? The brother was speechless for a moment, stammering, that is force majeure, I really don't know why they all like me, and I can't do anything about it, but the only person I really like is you. I swear, if I lie, I will be struck by lightning. In Juzhu, oaths cannot be made casually. It can be seen that even if this brother was a scumbag in the past, he has now become a licking dog. But, why did he fall for this bad woman when he could choose anyone else? Musian knew who the girl was just by hearing the name that the senior brother called out earlier. Huang Manting, the daughter of the Don Chamber of Commerce, was also someone who had been attached to the Queen of the Demon Realm before. Musian could see that the conditions for the Queen of the Demon Realm to attach to her might be limited. First, she had to be naturally charming and have a seductive temperament. Second, she had to be a bad woman. Musian also had some impression of the senior brother who spoke up. He was Ding Jingde, the 6th senior brother of Tianji Peak. In the past, he relied on his status as a senior brother to deceive several junior sisters who were not very experienced in the world. He didn't know when he met Huang Manting by chance, and gradually became addicted to her and was willing to bow down to her. Poor simple-minded senior brother was played around by her. Musian had taught Huang Manting, a beauty. Although she was not a king in tea art, she was at least a master. She had seen so many men like Ding Jingde in the Chamber of Commerce before. It was easy to tame a dog. I am not interested in the things in the pilgrimage temple. If you have nothing to do, please get out of the way. The Ascension Conference is coming soon. I want to go back and continue to practice, Huang Manting said lightly. However, Ding Jingde still refused to give up and was shameless. If I remember correctly, Manting seemed to be very close to Musian. Is it because of him that she rejected me? I am not interested in anyone, including Musian. Senior brother Ding, please go back. Huang Manting's tone was already a little impatient. Junior sister. Before she finished speaking, Huang Manting raised her fingertips and gently touched Ding Jingde's forehead. In an instant, Ding Jingde was about to fall, staring at Huang Manting with a dazed look, and then fell straight to the ground. And Huang Manting was surrounded by a faint pink mist, full of charm. Although there was a distance between them, Musian was the first to notice the origin of the pink mist. Demonic aura. Huang Manting is from the demon world. How is it possible? Isn't she the daughter of the president of the Dan Chamber of Commerce? When did she get involved with the people of the demon world? Musian's heart beat slightly, and he gently clasped his hands together. The black mist of the southern wilderness secret art was about to permeate his body, hiding his own aura. However, at this time, in front of the quiet South Bank Square, a soft and charming voice suddenly came, "Mr. Mew, why do you want to leave as soon as you see Manting? Don't I have any attraction in your eyes?" At the end, she inadvertently glanced behind the stone pillar where Musian was hiding. Musian sighed quietly, then walked out from behind a stone pillar not far away, raising his hands to show that he had no ill intentions. When did Miss Manting's perception become so strong? You didn't seem to have such exaggerated perception before, did you? Huang Manting walked in the hazy white mist, her black skirt fluttering in the wind. She gently pressed her body against Musian, nestled in his arms, and gently circled his chest with her slender fingers painted with black nails. She raised her eyes and smiled and said, "This is not a place to talk. If you don't mind, go back with Manting and talk slowly." Musian spread his hands. "Since Miss Manting said so, then Mew will naturally not let you down. What can be done? Is this woman who is shouting for help everywhere now a demon cultivator?" Huang Manting used some kind of magic that even Ding Jingde could faint in an instant. I'm afraid his junior brother is not much better than Ding Jingde. As Huang Manting returned to Yewan where she lived, Huang Manting hung the black gauze draped over her shoulders on a chair beside her, then turned her head and looked at Musian and said with a smile, "Mr. Mew, what kind of tea would you like to drink?" "All is fine. I also want to learn Miss Manting's tea art." Musian smiled and looked at her slender back. Huang Manting smiled sweetly, "Since Mr. Mew said so, then Manting will personally prepare a pot of tea for Mr. Mew." She prepared tea with graceful movements, while Musian looked around casually and said casually, "Miss Manting, do you have any experience with what happened a few days ago?" Huang Manting placed the teacup in front of Musian's desk, raised her eyes and looked at him with a smile. "Mr. Mew, you want to ask me if I still have any memories of being attached to Her Majesty the Queen? Didn't you already give me the answer?" Musian chuckled, very calmly. Then, he calmly took a sip of tea to calm down his shock. "I am also a member of Her Majesty the Queen." After a moment, Musian made his position clear. Huang Manting sat with her legs crossed, and the hem of her black skirt outlined her round, snow-white legs. She took a slow sip of tea and said, "I know. However, I just found out about it today." "Someone told you?" Musian became a little more interested. Huang Manting glanced at him. "Her Majesty the Queen said so." Suddenly hearing the name Queen of the Demon Realm from the other party's mouth, Musian had a hint of doubt in his eyes. He could feel that the Queen of the Demon Realm had always regarded him as a chess piece, and it was a hidden chess piece on the edge. In the end, the other party would actually tell Huang Manting such a thing? "Actually, I went out tonight just to find you." Huang Manting chuckled lightly and continued, "But it just happened that Mr. Mew came over by himself." "Come to me late at night, could it be that Her Majesty the Queen wants to kill someone and silence her?" Musian said with a somewhat joking tone, but in fact he had silently held the jade slip in his hand. Huang Manting shook her head and smiled, "No, no, Mr. Mew has been kind to me. No matter what, Manting is not someone who repays kindness with enmity." She put down the teacup gently, "It's just that I have something to ask Mr. Mew for help." "Miss Manting, please tell me." "Her Majesty the Queen asked me to send a ray of your spiritual consciousness back to the demon world." Huang Manting looked sideways at Musian and said softly, "A wisp of spiritual consciousness, Musian remained calm on the surface and quietly held the jade slip tightly. How can spiritual consciousness be brought back to the demon world? Once Huang Manting showed any signs of taking action, he would immediately use this jade slip to notify Wei Mengru to come over. It's very simple. However, Huang Manting had no intention of taking action. She just put her delicate and beautiful face in front of Musian. Her small red lips opened slightly, and soon, she gently breathed out pink mist full of sweet fragrance. That's enough. She looked at Musian lying on the table and said with a smile. Demon world. The distance between here and Dongzhou is unimaginable. Even if those monks in the god-refining realm were on the road without sleep, flying with their swords at a straight distance would take at least nearly 5 days. Because she had swallowed the essence of the first demon emperor, the queen of the demon realm could not leave Bizhu easily. If she were a normal person, she would probably choose to put aside Musian's affairs for the time being and refining the essence with peace of mind. But the queen of the demon realm is obviously not a normal person. Musian's people can't take him to the demon world, because if they want to take him away, they will be stopped by others. But a ray of his spiritual consciousness can be quickly brought to the demon world. The power of the Hedeo realm has the means to reach the sky. It is still very easy to achieve this level. And with this ray of spiritual consciousness, you can do many, many things. Musian slowly opened his eyes. The strange ceiling came into view, as if complaining, "Hey, strange human beings." The environment around the hall was grand, with 3 unfamiliar monks standing on each side. Where is this? Musian covered his forehead and felt the emptiness in his body. He slowly stood up and looked up. At the end of the field of vision is a golden throne inlaid with snake heads, and in front of the throne sits a coquettish beauty wearing a gorgeous dress. Her body proportions are excellent, her figure is tall, her appearance is beautiful, her eyes are majestic, but her temperament is charming and coquettish. The plump and attractive figure can only be understood but cannot be described. Queen of the demon realm, Musian was stunned for a moment, and happened to meet the charming eyes of the demon realm queen staring at him. The moment their eyes met, he slowly made a big question mark. Damn it, I went to the demon world when I woke up. You all stand down first. At this time, the queen of the demon realm suddenly spoke. She slowly stood up from the throne and stared at Musian with her charming eyes. I have something I want to talk to him about alone. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 305. Musian was in a very Buddhist and indifferent state at the moment. He completely emptied himself and looked up at the unfamiliar environment in front of him, as well as the queen who was sitting high in front of the throne. The queen of the demon realm stood in front of the throne and stared at him, smiling. Don't you have anything to say? Musian raised his hand and bowed without saying a word. Your Majesty, since you have abducted me, to the demon world, you must have your reasons. You Huang Manting, not only did you become the subordinate of the queen of the demon realm, but you also abducted my spiritual consciousness to the demon world, and this beautiful snake. Musian suddenly bit the tip of his tongue lightly, forcibly interrupted the thoughts in his mind, and emptied his mind. The queen of the demon realm can read minds. If he has any disrespectful thoughts about her in his mind, I'm afraid he will be noticed at the first time. Musian calmed down and said respectfully, Your Majesty, I wonder why you brought my spiritual consciousness here. The queen of the demon realm did not answer. She looked at Musian with complicated eyes, and then restored her usual cold attitude and said, I want to investigate some things, so I need your cooperation. As she said that, she raised her chin slightly and gestured to the maid beside her. The maid wore a plain double-breasted small shirt with purple petals embroidered on it, and a plain white skirt on the lower body, which also made the maid's original intellectual temperament more pure. Although her appearance is not as charming as the queen of the demon realm, she is still outstanding among the female cultivators. The second seat in the demon world is also the personal maid beside the queen of the demon realm. She came to Musian's side and said with a smile, "Mr. Mew, please follow me." The moment their eyes met, Musian's heart jumped slightly, and he felt an indescribable palpitation. Return to the void realm. No, it's even more than return to the void realm. This maidservant beside the queen of the demon realm is indeed a simple. Musian followed the maidservant along the corridor of the hall with some doubts in his heart. Although he didn't know the purpose of the queen of the demon realm, he was just a wisp of spiritual consciousness here. Even if something went wrong, it would not affect his body. At most, it would cause some damage to his spirit. Besides, the queen of the demon realm should have no reason to do anything to him. When Musian followed the maid's footsteps and walked into an empty hall, the maid raised her hand and pinched her fingers. Outside the hall, a huge formation enveloped Musian. "Relax your body, I won't hurt you." As if she noticed Musian's instantly tense body, the charming voice of the queen of the demon realm suddenly rang in Musian's ears. He subconsciously turned his head to look. For some reason, he always felt that the other party's eyes looking at him did not seem to be as teasing as in the past, but there was a little more complexity in her eyes. The next moment, Musian's consciousness fell into darkness, and the formation above Musian's head showed a picture that looked like an image. The second seat of the demon world looked up at the image in the air and suddenly said, "Your Majesty, you have never let me use the secret method on anyone in the past. What happened to him in the past that makes you care so much?" This secret method can reflect a person's past and present lives, and even his 7 emotions and 6 desires. And this secret method, even the second seat cannot use it, and needs the help of the demon energy in this hall to barely use it. This is enough to show how much interest the queen of the demon world has in Musian. "I had a dream." The queen of the demon realm looked at Musian's spiritual consciousness, and her charming voice came faintly in the hall, "This dream is very real, and there are some things in the dream that make me care a little." Before the second seat spoke, the queen of the demon realm stared at the image in the air with her beautiful eyes. "Let's start, and you will know the answer later." The second seat whispered yes. She closed her eyes slightly, and when she opened them again the next moment, there was already a hint of pink luster in her beautiful eyes. And at that moment, a breath slowly floated out of Musian's body. Luck. Pink luck. Luck determines the life of a cultivator, but this is the first time I have seen peach-colored luck. It's worthy of being someone that His Majesty cares about, the second seat commented secretly. Afterwards, he carefully observed the pink glow that was spreading on Musian's body at the moment. Among the 7 emotions and 6 desires, the one that accounts for the most of him is a stringent desire. This Musian looks like a romantic person, the second seat said to himself. The queen of the demon realm did not say anything, but quietly looked at the picture gradually emerging in the air. A woman in a white dress appeared in the field of vision. She looked cold and weak. She bit her lips lightly and stared at the boy in the image. This was Musian's present life, and the woman above was the one he cared about. Biruoxi. I remember that half of this person is my demon world bloodline, but it's a pity that she joined the Lianji section. The second seat raised her eyebrows slightly, obviously recognizing Biruoxi. But if it was just a woman, how could it be Sayu? Sure enough, the second woman soon emerged in the image. She was wearing a purple dress, and the thin ribbon outlined her slender waist. Her smile was pure and lovely, and she was very beautiful. The second seat stared slightly and said, "The saint of the Forbidden Zone, she is indeed an excellent woman. It's no wonder that this person is fickle. Yalingxian is top-notch in terms of beauty, talent, and even background. If you put yourself in her shoes, a little beauty like this actively pursues, no one can resist it. Yeqian, she is a disciple of the Green Emperor, and she is a sister of Yalingxian. I heard that men have almost no immunity to sisters." The second seat was thoughtful, looking at the third woman who appeared. Her eyes were still calm. She is an extremely rational person. Although she disdains men's indecision, she can understand it. After all, whether it is the Yes Sisters or Biruoxi, they are indeed beauties that men cannot resist. Musian will naturally not be able to resist such temptation at this age. Next, new women continue to appear in the picture, and the second seat is also deeply impressed by this woman. This woman is Shang Yanfei's close disciple. She is probably the first genius of her peers in Zhu to enter the Return to Void realm. I am afraid she will be a great enemy of the demon world in the future, the second seat whispered to himself. At this moment, she understood Musian quite well. After all, whether it was Lan Murian or Lan Feiying, charming and enchanting women, they were irresistible temptations for a big boy like Musian. It was no wonder that Musian was so indecisive. However, 5 beauties had intimate relationships with him. Musian was considered to have some skills. The second seat nodded secretly. Although her mental power was consumed a lot, her expression was still calm. The price of this secret technique is spiritual energy on the one hand and mental power on the other. The longer this secret technique is maintained, the more mental power is consumed. Originally, according to the second seat's expectation, Musian's desire would at most appear 2 or 3 Taoist companions. Unexpectedly, there were 5. Thinking of this, the second seat was about to speak. At this time, the queen of the demon realm suddenly said indifferently, "Steady the spiritual energy, it's not over yet." The second seat subconsciously looked up, and when he saw the yellow-skirted beauty appear again in the picture, he was slightly stunned. Not over yet? However, with her current mental strength, she could barely maintain it for another half an hour, and it would not be a problem to support it for a while. Thinking of this, the second seat held his breath and continued to maintain the secret method. The next person to appear in the image was a fairy in a green long skirt. Her temperament was ethereal, like the fairy in Guanggan Palace, which made people feel a sense of awe from the bottom of their hearts. Even the Qing Emperor of Yaokai Holy Land, it seems that the previous rumors that Musian and Qing Emperor had a close relationship may not be false news. The second seat had a little more thoughtfulness in his heart, and his mental strength was gradually on the verge of collapse. A person in the Hedeo realm, even if it is just a false Hedeo realm, the spiritual energy and mental strength required to reflect the other party are also enormous. But it's no wonder that Her Majesty the Queen cares so much about Musian. Although this cultivator's realm is not high, the confidants around him are more amazing than each other. When the second seat thought of this, he was about to put away the secret method, but at this moment, he suddenly saw another beauty appear after the fairy in the green skirt. The owner of the library, Yan Ruyu. The second seat looked at this scene, and for some reason, he felt a little more uneasy in his heart, and an extremely absurd thought popped up in his mind: there won't be more, right? Facts have proved that the probability of something happening will increase when you are most afraid of it. A quarter of an hour later, the second seat stared at the beauty gradually emerging in the image with a dull look, and fell into deep thought. After a long time, seeing that no new people appeared in the picture, she slowly exhaled in her heart. Finally, it's over. At this moment, she felt a little relieved. What's the situation with this person? He hasn't been locked in the small black room after operating multi-threaded for so long? From the video just now, she found that several beauties looked at Musian with a little darkness in their eyes, and the chain of desolate time in the sleeves of the forbidden saint was even ready to move. But this guy even thought about Her Majesty the Queen. He is really brave enough. When she recalled that the last woman who appeared in the video just now was the Queen of the Demon Realm, the second seat looked at Musian with a little more sympathy. The Queen of the Demon Realm was born to fascinate all living beings, but if you really have some evil thoughts in front of her, the other party's fate will be quite tragic. Moreover, in the picture just now, Musian actually imagined the scene of him pressing the wrist of the Queen of the Demon Realm and trying to suppress her forcefully. No, this is not imagination, but Musian himself has this idea, so this kind of picture will appear. The second seat quietly glanced at the queen beside him, but saw that her expression was still natural, and her charming eyes were always staring at Musian. There was no anger in those beautiful eyes, but instead a little bit of reminiscence. Buzz. At this time, the second seat suddenly felt a buzz in her brain, and almost fainted. She subconsciously looked up in the air, and saw that at the end of the image that was about to disappear, a peerless woman seemed to appear vaguely. However, the strangest thing was that Musian had never imagined anything like being intimate with this woman from beginning to end, so there was no related scene in the image. There are only two possibilities: Musian was not familiar with her, and he respected or feared this person very much, so he never had any evil thoughts. Another possibility is that, the woman who appears at this moment is someone Musian knew in his previous life, not this life. Is this the real reason why Her Majesty the Queen asked me to use the secret technique? The second officer narrowed his eyes, resisting the dizziness, and raised his head to stare at the woman's back. The woman's back looks extremely blurry, as if covered by a mosaic, but just at the first glance, it makes people feel awe from the bottom of their hearts. Who is this person? The second seat tried hard to see the woman's face clearly, holding on to his gradually depleted mental energy. At this moment, the woman in the image looked over slightly. Boom! Almost at that moment, there was a deafening roar in the second seat's mind, blood spurted from his mouth, his hands clutched his chest, and he knelt on the ground uncontrollably. Musian knew a certain powerful man in the past, and this woman was his former Taoist companion. The scene in mid-air completely collapsed, and the Queen of the Demon Realm put her hand on the second seat's shoulder to protect her spiritual consciousness. The second seat panted heavily, and it took nearly a stick of incense to finally recover, and said in an apologetic tone, "I'm sorry, in the end, I still couldn't let His Majesty see clearly who that person was. Can't peep." The woman who appeared at the end blocked the secret, which is equivalent to her existence itself being a bug, an existence that was missed by the Great Road. The Queen of the Demon Realm still looked natural, looking up at the scene that had long since disappeared, but there was a hint of darkness in her charming eyes. "No need to see clearly," she said quietly, "I already know who she is." As expected, she is not the only one who has been reborn. Musian slowly opened his eyes and saw a pair of slender legs as smooth as jade. He looked up along those beautiful legs, and saw the Queen of the Demon Realm looking down at him. Her charming eyes were so alluring, and her plump breasts highlighted by the gorgeous long skirt had a charm that made people's eyes involuntarily be drawn away. She stared at Musian and said, "Your physique is much more useful than I thought." He can't recognize Musian yet. He hasn't awakened the memory of his past life yet. Even if he is told the truth now, he may not believe it. However, even without the memory of their previous life, they can still have this life. With her existence, it couldn't be easier to attract a little boy. Of course, the premise is that he can stay in the demon world in the future. Naturally, he can't do it now. After all, his true body is still in the Lianji sect, and what remains here is just a wisp of ethereal spiritual consciousness. However, it's not possible now, it's not certain in the future. In response to the Queen of the Demon Realm's praise, Musian remained humble and did not say a word. He raised his hands and bowed and said, "Thank you, Her Majesty the Queen, for your approval. In the future, Mu will continue to work hard for your Majesty." The Queen of the Demon Realm pursed her lips and said calmly, "There is no need to be a cow or a horse, but you will be useful in the future." She took out a bronze mirror from her arms and handed it to Musian. "This is a communication mirror. I will use this mirror to contact you in the future." "Does this mean that I can contact the Queen of the Demon Realm at any time, even in the Lianji sect in the future, without having to relay it through other people?" "She treats me as a confidant." Musian had some doubts in her heart. She obviously didn't do anything, but the attitude of the Queen of the Demon Realm turned around a bit. He wanted to think about it, but he still accepted the communication mirror and thanked him again. Although he didn't know the purpose of the Queen of the Demon Realm, it was always a good thing that the other party would trust him. It's just a pity that I didn't cram in and practice a little bit in the past 2 days. Even if I become more proficient in the skills, my chances of winning in the Immortal Ascension Conference will be greatly improved. Musian seemed to have remembered something important and frowned slightly. He slowly raised his head and asked, "Speaking of which, how long have I been in the demon world?" 2 days, the second seat next to him said. 2 days. Musian's expression changed slightly. Damn it, the Immortal Ascension Conference has already started. The Queen of the Demon Realm seemed to know Musian's worries, her beautiful eyes narrowed, and her soft and numb voice sounded softly in his ears. "Don't worry, I will send your spiritual consciousness back to the Liangyi section." South Bank. At this moment, in front of the South Bank, several squares were crowded with monks from all over the Kyushu. They looked up at the scene emerging in mid-air, with some interest in their eyes. The gathering of geniuses at this Immortal Ascension Conference can be said to be a grand event that may not happen once in thousands of years. Naturally, these elders from the ancient families who were invited wanted to see the performance of the heirs of their own clans. Let alone the first place in the Immortal Ascension Conference, even if you can enter the top 10, it is enough to make your family proud. There are several squares scattered on the south bank, and at this moment, there are competing monks competing fiercely in various competition venues. Next, Musian. In a certain competition venue, as the old man's expressionless voice fell, countless eyes all looked towards the high platform. The name Musian is familiar to most disciples in the sect. It's not because of the other person's talent or anything, but because this fellow's Taoist companion is Bairuoxi, the proud disciple of Kanghai Peak, and he also has 2 sisters with beautiful and refined looks. Even the maids beside him are stunningly beautiful. Most people have no ill intentions toward Musian, because he used to be very easygoing, and only a small number of people were jealous of him. However, this small group of people say they are jealous, rather they are annoyed by their stupid mouth. Musian's ability to pursue Bairuoxi has nothing to do with his talent or background. What is more important is the way he pursues beauty's speech. And it just so happens that for those who used to devote themselves to cultivating Taoism, what they lack most is the ability in this area. The old man raised his eyelids slightly and spoke again, "Musian." After the voice fell, there was still no movement in the audience. There was a slight commotion in the audience. In front of the high platform in the distance, Yan Ruyu sat upright. Today she was wearing a loose chien robe with plump begonia flowers on it. Her beautiful face was covered by black silk and outlined by a thin ribbon, showing her plump and straight breasts and slender waist. The master of the library is at the age when women are most plump, as attractive as a peach. At this moment, she frowned slightly, looking at the sect genius on the stage who was waiting for Musian to arrive, and looked at the disciples around her. He said softly, "Is there no news about my disciple yet?" The disciple next to him whispered, "The disciple has searched everywhere in the sect today, but he has not been seen. I heard that he did not return to Tianhewan yesterday." Yan Ruyu frowned slightly and looked at the stage, wondering what she was thinking. At this time, the deputy chief of Hidden Sword Peak looked at Yan Ruyu with a smile and said warmly, "Junior sister Yan, don't be anxious. The Hidden Library Pavilion has a special status. It is different from other main peaks. If you don't participate in the Immortal Ascension Conference, you won't participate. After all, it hasn't been done in previous years. So, even if Mujian's disciples participate, this Immortal Ascension Conference will probably be." When he said this, he couldn't help but shook his head. Musian is now at the 4th level of God Refining, and because of the thunder catastrophe in the martial arts assessment, he fell from the peak of the 4th level of God Refining to the 4th level of God Refining. This level of strength is the most advanced in this Immortal Ascension Conference. The top 100, and a little higher, it will be a bit difficult. After all, this Immortal Ascension Conference is full of geniuses. It is a real golden age and the most valuable Immortal Ascension Conference. Yanruya glanced at the deputy leader of Hidden Sword Peak who was speaking not far away, and said, "Senior Brother Wang, please don't bother. I believe that my disciple will not abandon the game without reason." When the leader saw this, he couldn't help but smile. "Actually, it doesn't matter if we really give up. This year is no better than in previous years. Even if we really participate, it will be difficult to get a good ranking. It would be better to say that each of the disciples from Hidden Sword Peak participating in this competition are higher than Musian, and 2 of them happen to be in the same group as Musian. I'm afraid he won't even be able to pass their level." Yanruya glanced at it and said with a smile, "Senior Brother's disciples are indeed outstanding, but I don't know if they can be sure to win against my disciple's Taoist companion." The deputy leader of Hidden Sword Peak choked and was speechless for a moment. One of the most powerful competitors in this Immortal Ascension Conference is Biru Oxy. Who can say with certainty that he can win her? Even Lan Mulian may not be sure of this. After all, she has not yet refined the enlightenment seeds given by Musian. At this time, Ning Yuan, the leader of Ziwimeng Peak, shook his head and said with a smile, "The Taoist couple is a Taoist couple, and Musian is Musian. Is it possible that when Musian's disciple meets Biru Oxy, his Taoist couple will still be there? Can't we simply abstain?" As soon as these words came out, many elders couldn't help but nodded slightly. Only this time, Yesiyu, who accepted the invitation and represented the Forbidden Zone to watch the Immortal Ascension Conference, frowned slightly. She sat next to these leaders and the elders of Kyushu, turned her head and curled her lips, as if she was a little dismissive. She originally planned to participate, but then she considered that the only people sent to the sect this time were her and Yechian. If Yechian participated, it would be better for her to represent the restricted area and sit here. What's more, she had no interest in the Immortal Ascension Conference in the first place, but it was more interesting to catch Musian. "Miss Ye seems to have something to say." At this moment, the elder from Yuzhou suddenly spoke with a smile, seeing Yesiyu's disdain. And a few of the elders on the side also looked over. Yesiyu narrowed his eyes and smiled, "I don't have anything to say, I just think you guys underestimate that guy too much. In fact, what these people said is correct. In terms of superficial strength, Musian is indeed average, but he has hidden a lot of trump cards. There may be several chaotic bodies in this world, but they can possess multiple ones at the same time. Musian is the only person with an evil constitution." The invited elders from Jiuzhu all smiled lightly and did not argue. They knew that Yesiyu had a close relationship with Musian, and it was normal for him to speak on his side. However, this is a competition venue, and so-called background or connections will not be considered. The disciple standing on the stage now is at the peak of the 5th level of God refining. What can a 4th level God refining monk do to win against him? What's more, Musian is nowhere to be seen now, so he might have abandoned the game. At this time, Yingguhuan, who had been keeping quiet with his eyes slightly closed, suddenly slowly opened his eyes and looked up into the air. Someone in the audience quickly noticed something and suddenly said, "He's here." The whispers fell silent for a moment, and then, several people looked at them in unison, and indeed they saw the figure of the noble prince wearing a black and gold robe wielding a sword in the distance. Yingguhuan looked at Musian suspiciously. The aura left behind by the queen of the demon realm. Only demon cultivators and people who are extremely sensitive to spiritual energy can sense such an aura. Even Ye Lingxian, who is born with a spiritual body, may have to return to the void realm to sense the aura on Musian at this moment. Her Majesty the Queen has taken a fancy to him, and deliberately left her aura on him. Yingguhuan narrowed her beautiful eyes, and there was a hint of meaning in her eyes. No. Rather than warning other demon cultivators, it seems more like provoking someone. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 306. There is a waterfall deep in Lianji Peak, surrounded by mountains and rivers, and beside the waterfall is a clean and elegant pavilion. In the pavilion, concubine Shangyan held a pen in her hand, sometimes raising her head to think, and sometimes lowering her head to write. The raven-black long skirt wrapped around her delicate body, highlighting her graceful figure. The skirt of the dress relaxed slightly as she lowered her head, and a hint of snow white appeared vaguely. Just at the first glance, one realizes that this woman is unfathomable. At this time, a fairy voice like the sound of nature suddenly came from outside the pavilion. I have seen this book in Tianhe Garden. Was it originally written by you? Concubine Shangyan looked out of the corner of her eye, and saw beauties in green skirts with a cool and fairy-like temperament. Concubine Shangyan put down the pen in her hand, her clear eyes moved, and she said softly, "Why do you have time to come to my place?" Yao Meng's eyes fell on the booklet in concubine Shangyan's hand. There was a strange luster in her beautiful eyes. She looked back calmly and smiled reservedly. After Hideo, we have reached the ultimate level. Now in the holy land of Yaokai with the Queen Mother in charge, there will be a lot of free time every day without this worry. Compared to me, the sect leader is more leisurely and elegant, and he still has time to compile books like The Way to Control a Husband. Yao Meng's red lips slightly opened, with a smile in her eyes. In the past, I also got some ideas from this book. A lot of useful things. For example, what can be done to completely control the Taoist's heart in one's own hands, and some special games that can only be played in bed. Who would have thought that the person who compiled such a book would be the head of the Lianji sect? Concubine Shangyan closed the book, picked up the milky white teacup, and pushed it to the opposite side. How is Fairy Yao Meng's spiritual energy recovering now? Shangyan Fei smiled and looked at Fairy Kinkan sitting opposite. Until yesterday, my spiritual energy had not recovered much. Yao Meng picked up the teacup, took a sip of the tea, stared at it with beautiful green eyes, and continued, but starting from today, the recovery speed of spiritual energy is far 100 times faster than before. Concubine Shangyan smiled brightly, isn't that great? Actually, I don't really care about whether my spiritual energy is sufficient, Yao Meng said with a smile. Now that the rules of heaven and earth have been rewritten, she can quickly absorb spiritual energy even without Musian's natural furnace. Because, today's Kyushu, spiritual energy is gradually becoming stronger, and the era of immortal is coming again. But it was also because at this time, it was no longer possible for her to use the reason of depletion of spiritual energy to absorb Musian's natural cauldron as she did in the past. The rules of heaven and earth have changed. The sect leader should know what's going on, right? She spoke again and stated the purpose of her trip. The death of the first-generation demon emperor, and the death of a statue in the Hideo realm resulted in the rewriting of the rules of heaven and earth. In the next 100 years, there will be multiple enlightenment realms, concubine Shangyan said lightly. For monks, this is a good thing. Is this your plan too? Yao Meng asked. Concubine Shangyan shook her head and smiled. I'm not a god, so I can't do so many things. But after this time, Hideo realm probably needs to be in retreat for a while, she said quietly. It takes time to rewrite the rules of heaven and earth, and during this period, if a powerful Hideo takes action, there is a high probability that it will affect the order of heaven and earth, and the age of immortals will not come. It doesn't matter to me, Yao Meng smiled lightly. Now besides practicing, she has also found some new fun. This pleasure alone could keep her entertained for a long time. Even Musian might have to spend hundreds of millions more energy. Is this why you gave the essence of the first demon emperor to the queen of the demon world? Yao Meng asked. Concubine Shang Yan pursed her red lips slightly, with a faint smile in her eyes. That woman doesn't care whether the age of immortality comes or not. The essence of the first demon emperor can at least make her calm for a while. Yao Meng put down the teacup, glanced at the books on the table, opened them casually, took a few more glances, and then said, "Can you lend me this thing for 2 days?" A faint smile bloomed on concubine Shang Yan's beautiful face, and she said calmly, "I have already remembered the sample in my mind. Let this sample be regarded as a gift to you." Seeing that Yao Meng seemed to be planning to leave after putting away the books, concubine Shang Yan asked, "Are you going back?" Yao Meng looked sideways and said with a smile, "Isn't today the immortal assembly? Let's go and relax and see how the child is growing up. Watching the fellow Taoists around you gradually grow up will give you a pleasant sense of satisfaction. If the sect master has never experienced it, you can try it." Under Yao Meng's gaze, the sect leader's sister, who was wearing a black dress, had a mysterious temperament, picturesque features, and was as elegant as a flower, suddenly smiled sweetly. "If I had the chance, I would try it." Meanwhile, on the other side, "It's really strange, logically speaking, your Majesty should not make such a small mistake. If she really favors Musian, how could he expose his involvement in the demon world?" In front of the high platform, Yang Guhuan leaned on the seat and raised his head to stare at Musian, who was wielding a sword from the far end of the horizon, with a hint of solemnity and thoughtfulness in his eyes. After Emperor Qing came to join the Tao, he granted the first immortal fate to several people who had been kind to Musian in the past, and Yang Guhuan was naturally one of them. Now that she has reached the 8th stage of returning to the void, she is only one step away from enlightenment. Such strength naturally enhanced Yang Guhuan's perception, and since she was originally from the demon world, she was naturally very familiar with the aura emanating from Musian. Even though she was now at the 8th level of return to void, she was sincerely in awe of the aura emanating from him at this moment. Because in the eyes of others, Musian might not have changed at all, but for Yang Guhuan, it was as if a charming giant python was entangled behind Musian at this moment. "Musian." At this time, the old man's indifferent voice came again on the stage. According to the rules, if the contestant did not arrive at the scene within 1 stick of incense, he would automatically be judged as a loser. And now, 1 stick of incense was about to burn out completely. Among the cultivators in the audience, many people looked up at the black spot in the air. Regardless of whether Musian was rushing here now, as long as the stick of incense burned out completely, he would not be able to participate in the subsequent Ascension Conference. For these people watching the show, this was undoubtedly a pity. After all, some people don't have much feeling about Musian's talent, and most of them know him through his Taoist partner and sister. Bairuoxi's talent and beauty are recognized by everyone, but Musian is different. In the final analysis, although most people don't say anything on the surface, they feel that this Taoist couple is not a good match. One is a girl of heaven who is very likely to impact the realm of enlightenment in the future, while the other has only reached the 4th level of soul refining so far. Even among the disciples of the sect, she is just an ordinary person with a little talent. During this period, cultivators from all over Jiuzhu were impressed by the beauties in the sect, and when they knew that the inner disciple of Kanghai Peak already had a Taoist partner, they were naturally curious about the other party's identity. At this Ascension Conference, many people were waiting to see Musian's joke. No matter how good your popularity is in the sect, no matter how well you understand the ways of the world, what use can it be at the Ascension Conference? In the end, you still have to rely on yourself. If he is eliminated in the first match, the name Musian will become a joke for people to talk about after dinner. Of course, being eliminated late or being eliminated after fighting, the latter is naturally more topical. No matter what the reason, people hope to see Musian participate in the competition. Even the disciple of Kang Jian-peak on the stage at this moment is no exception. The incense on the stage gradually burned out, and the old man in front of the high stage raised his eyelids slightly. Boom! The figure in the distance turned into a stream of light at the end, accelerated and rushed over, and finally stopped steadily in the venue. Sorry, there was an accident on the road and I was a step late. Musian glanced at the incense not far away and smiled, but it seems that the time is just right. The old man nodded slightly, glanced at the Kang Jian-peak disciples on the stage, and said, "Since everyone is here, let's get ready." In front of the high stage in the distance, Yan Ruyu's beautiful eyes gazed at Musian. Although her expression was indifferent, there was inevitably some worry in her eyes. Although I believe in Musian's ability, the disciple of Kang Jian-peak is at least at the peak of the 5th level of soul refining, which is nearly 2 levels lower than Musian. If there is no martial arts assessment, it would be fine, but now Musian has fallen to the initial stage of the 4th level of soul refining because of the thunder tribulation. Such a gap is inevitably worrying. Ning Yuan, the head of Ziwimeng Peak, obviously noticed the worry in Yan Ruyu's eyes, and smiled. "Junior sister, you can relax. Many people from Zhuzhou came to this Ascension conference. We should be united against the enemy. Even if Musian is really eliminated, there are still disciples of Ziwimeng Peak." Yan Ruyu smiled lightly and said, "Don't worry, senior brother, I believe in my disciple." After that, he ignored Ning Yuan and looked calmly at the high platform where Musian was. Ning Yuan opened his mouth, as if he wanted to say something, but when he saw Yan Ruyu's cold expression, he finally held back his inner thoughts. Seeing this, Yu Suanji, the head of Tianji Peak, couldn't help but chuckle. Although senior brother Ning has also reached the 6th level of Return to Void, he is probably not as good as Musian's disciple in pursuing female cultivators. Among the heads, Yan Ruyu is the youngest, and because of her beauty and intellectual temperament, she is very popular not only among the heads but also among the disciples. It's just that this woman has rarely had intimate interactions with other people from the past to the present. In the past, when she was still in Daofeng, she had a very close relationship with her senior sister Yuzian, but later they parted ways because of some disputes. Looking at the two people who were ready in front of the high platform in the distance, suddenly a head smiled and said, "Who do you think will be the final winner of this Ascension Conference?" "That will naturally be my disciple from Canghai Peak Yi Hao," who was standing aside, said with a somewhat confident tone. He has great confidence in Bairuoxi's talent and strength. Even if there are many geniuses this time, Bairuoxi will definitely win in the end. Yuzian chuckled, "My two disciples are no less talented than Bairuoxi's disciple. If they really meet, it's not certain who will win." Among the cultivators of the same generation, apart from Lan Murian, no one can compare to my disciple Wei Mengru in terms of realm. The head of Huabao Peak laughed proudly. At this time, the 9 chiefs suddenly formed a sharp contrast. One side seemed to be smiling happily, while the other side was completely silent. In the past, when they were competing for these extremely talented inner disciples, they did not participate at all, but chose other more promising disciples. The reason was that they felt that doing so was too low in status. To put it bluntly, they did not want to be so aggressive, and it would cost a huge price to accept an inner disciple. But who would have thought that this Ascension Conference would become the focus of attention in Zhuzhou? The most important thing for the chief to accept disciples is fame, and one of the simplest ways to get fame is to make his disciples famous. If you can squeeze into the top 10 in this Ascension Conference, you can become famous. In the future, when everyone sees a genius disciple in the top 10 of the Ascension Conference, they will remember who taught this disciple. Just thinking about it makes them proud. And now, the chiefs who did not fight for those genius disciples in the past are regretting it. It should have been a good opportunity for their main peak to become famous, but for the sake of prestige, they can only watch other main peaks shine. But fortunately, no matter what, they still have a bottom-ranked one here. The chiefs and elders of several main peaks such as Kangjian Peak looked at the disciple Musian in front of the high platform in the distance intentionally or unintentionally. Even if their disciples were eliminated before the top 100 of the Ascension Conference, they were better than the disciple accepted by junior sister Yan. After all, most of the disciples they accepted were around the 5th level of refining spirit, and Musian was only at the 4th level of refining spirit now. And it was unfortunate that they ran into a genius disciple at the peak of the 5th level of refining spirit at the beginning. Musian seems to be losing to Yuan Ping. At this time, the deputy chief of Kangjian Peak suddenly spoke. Everyone looked at the high platform where Musian was. His spiritual energy was a little disordered at the moment, and he was breathing heavily. In front of Musian, nearly 30 swords surrounded him. As Yuan Ping raised his hands and made hand gestures, the flying swords continued to attack Musian. He just consumed a lot of spiritual energy on the road, and he probably hasn't recovered yet. Yuzian saw something and frowned. In such an important occasion as the Ascension Conference, his strength is not as good as Yuan Ping, and he was late for so long. He can't blame others for losing. Ning Yuan shook his head. Yuan Ping is a disciple of my Kangjian Peak anyway. It's not shameful to lose to him. Xiaolin laughed heartily, and when he looked at Yuan Ping in front of the high platform, there was also a bit of satisfaction in his eyes. Then, he looked at Yan Ruyu and said with a smile, in fact, when junior sister chose Musian as an inner disciple so decisively, I thought junior sister had discovered his talent. But now it seems that junior sister may have simply liked him. Musian's performance at the moment is really disappointing, and it is no wonder that Xiaolin would gloat over his misfortune. Yuzian looked at Yan Ruyu with a smile and said, if junior sister regrets now, you can let him come to my Daofeng as an inner disciple later. Yan Ruyu looked indifferent, looking at the arena, not wanting to pay attention to them. At this moment, in front of the arena, Yuan Ping had his hands behind his back, with 9 swords surrounding him. He looked at Musian, who was surrounded by swords and still panting, and said with a smile, although Miss Bai is very talented, her vision in choosing a Taoist partner seems to be a little lacking. He had heard of Musian's name in the past, but it was not because of Musian's talent or anything, but because he learned that the beautiful girl from Kanghai Peak actually had a Taoist partner, so he knew Musian. Although he would not directly find fault with Musian with his own qualities, Yuan Ping was still somewhat unconvinced in his heart. After all, in his opinion, Musian's talent was not worthy of a beauty like Bairu Oxi. Musian looked around, looked at the sword blades surrounding him, looked at Yuan Ping nonchalantly, and said with a smile, love has nothing to do with talent. Brother Yuan seems to have some misunderstandings about feelings. Yuan Ping said with a hint of mockery in his eyes, Daomu is now a 4th-grade soul refiner, and if Miss Bai remembers correctly, she is already above the 7th-grade soul refiner, right? When she returns to the Void Realm in the future, she will experience more and her horizons will become higher. By then, she will dash. She will find that her husband Mu is such an excellent Taoist partner, Musian said with a smile. Being interrupted suddenly, Yuan Ping said with a hint of anger in his eyes, she will naturally know that there are many excellent cultivators in this world, and there are many choices to make. As the saying goes, a wife who has shared the hardships with you should not be abandoned, but, I seem to have put myself in the shoes of the heroine, anyway. He looked up at the disciple of Kangjian Peak and smiled, I don't think I'm weak either. Weak or not, I have the final say now. Yuan Ping chuckled, raised his hand and made a gesture, and nearly 30 swords behind him rushed towards Musian. Maybe Musian's talent is not weak, but as long as Musian is eliminated in the first round of the Ascension Conference, it is easy to imagine how the disciples in the sect and the cultivators in Zhuzhou will view Musian in the future. Seeing the sword blade coming at him, Musian opened his mouth slightly, You talk too much nonsense. Yuan Ping's eyes were cold. As the sword blade attacked Musian, he drew the sword behind him and rushed towards Musian. Musian took a step forward. and at this moment, the whole world turned gray. The sword blade stopped in mid-air, Yuan Ping's action of rushing towards Musian stopped, and the wind that blew past also stagnated in mid-air. After Wei Mengru obtained part of the power of the original witch, this power also indirectly became one of Musian's powers. 2 seconds later, time began to flow again. When Yuan Ping reacted, Musian had already appeared in front of him, and then, he punched out. The fist wind surged, and the simple punch shook Yuan Ping's internal organs and felt pain, and then the whole person flew out of the field like a cannonball. The old man in mid-air looked at this scene, his eyelids twitched slightly, and then he said calmly, "Musian wins." The voices in the field were silent for a moment. Even the elders were stunned for a long time. What did Musian do in that short period of less than 2 seconds just now? Even these elders didn't react. The eyes of the several chiefs who were discussing the matter earlier also showed some surprise and doubt. Whether Musian had used a secret method or something else, even they couldn't figure it out now. At this time, Yuzian seemed to have noticed something and subconsciously looked behind her. Not far behind them, a peerless fairy in a green skirt was floating in the air. She was bare white jade feet, with a fairy-like temperament. Her clear and bright green eyes looked in the direction of Musian, and her expression was always calm. Yuzian's actions were naturally noticed by the other chiefs. When several people turned their heads to look, their hearts trembled slightly. The Green Emperor? Why is she here too? Not all the chiefs and elders knew the relationship between Musian and the Green Emperor. So far, only the few female chiefs who had discovered that Musian was born as a furnace cauldron knew the secret. But they did not mention it to others. Yan Ruyu looked at the young man on the stage and relaxed a little. Then, a faint smile appeared in her beautiful eyes. She glanced at Xiao Lin and said with a smile, "Brother Xiao, if he is just a 4th-grade soul refiner, why should I accept him as an inner disciple?" Xiao Lin frowned slightly and whispered, "Not only the library, he is also the disciple of the Green Emperor." Yan Ruyu had a meaningful smile in her eyes and did not answer. Xiao Lin frowned slightly and looked at Musian on the stage again, then calmed down his heart a little and glanced at the fairy in the green skirt behind him. And this glance happened to see that the fairy had a faint smile on her lips at this moment. Her green eyes stared at the direction of Musian, and there seemed to be a hint of softness between her eyebrows, and some special emotions hidden in her eyes. "In the past, I did hear that Musian saved the life of the Green Emperor. It is not surprising that she accepted Musian as a disciple," Xiao Lin thought. If so, it can explain why Sister Yan accepted Musian as her inner disciple in the past. After all, she later received the immortal fate given by the Green Emperor because of this relationship. When Xiao Lin thought of this, he couldn't help but think of Yan Ruyu's meaningful eyes just now. He frowned, as if he thought of something, and then, as if a blue lightning flashed through his brain, his heart suddenly trembled, and subconsciously looked at Musian again, just to see him and the Green Emperor staring at each other. Logically speaking, even the heads of these people dared not look at the Green Emperor like this, so why would a cultivator in the refining spirit realm dare to be so disrespectful? Xiao Lin's eyes flickered slightly, and he subconsciously looked at Yan Ruyu not far away, and an extremely absurd word flashed through his mind. Deist companion. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 307. There is a waterfall deep in Lianji Peak, surrounded by mountains and rivers, and beside the waterfall is a clean and elegant pavilion. In the pavilion, concubine Shang Yan held a pen in her hand, sometimes raising her head to think, and sometimes lowering her head to write. The raven-black long skirt wrapped around her delicate body, highlighting her graceful figure. The skirt of the dress relaxed slightly as she lowered her head, and a hint of snow white appeared vaguely. Just at the first glance, one realizes that this woman is unfathomable. At this time, a fairy voice like the sound of nature suddenly came from outside the pavilion. "I have seen this book in Tianhe Garden." Was it originally written by you? Concubine Shangyan looked out of the corner of her eye, and saw a beauties in green skirts with a cool and fairy-like temperament. Concubine Shangyan put down the pen in her hand, her clear eyes moved, and she said softly, "Why do you have time to come to my place?" Yao Meng's eyes fell on the booklet in Concubine Shangyan's hand. There was a strange luster in her beautiful eyes. She looked back calmly and smiled reservedly. After Hideo, we have reached the ultimate level. Now in the holy land of Yaokai with the Queen Mother in charge, there will be a lot of free time every day without this worry. Compared to me, the sect leader is more leisurely and elegant, and he still has time to compile books like The Way to Control a Husband. Yao Meng's red lips slightly opened, with a smile in her eyes. In the past, I also got some ideas from this book. A lot of useful things. For example, what can be done to completely control the Taoist's heart in one's own hands, and some special games that can only be played in bed. Who would have thought that the person who compiled such a book would be the head of the Lianji sect? Concubine Shangyan closed the book, picked up the milky white teacup, and pushed it to the opposite side. How is Fairy Yao Meng's spiritual energy recovering now? Shangyan Fei smiled and looked at Fairy Kinkan sitting opposite. Until yesterday, my spiritual energy had not recovered much. Yao Meng picked up the teacup, took a sip of the tea, stared at it with beautiful green eyes, and continued, "But starting from today, the recovery speed of spiritual energy is far 100 times faster than before." Concubine Shangyan smiled brightly, "Isn't that great? Actually, I don't really care about whether my spiritual energy is sufficient," Yao Meng said with a smile. Now that the rules of heaven and earth have been rewritten, she can quickly absorb spiritual energy even without Musian's natural furnace. Because, today's Kyushu, spiritual energy is gradually becoming stronger, and the era of immortal is coming again. But it was also because at this time, it was no longer possible for her to use the reason of depletion of spiritual energy to absorb Musian's natural cauldron as she did in the past. The rules of heaven and earth have changed. The sect leader should know what's going on, right? She spoke again and stated the purpose of her trip. The death of the first-generation demon emperor, and the death of a statue in the Hideo realm resulted in the rewriting of the rules of heaven and earth. In the next 100 years, there will be multiple enlightenment realms. Concubine Shangyan said lightly, "For monks, this is a good thing." "Is this your plan too?" Yao Meng asked. Concubine Shangyan shook her head and smiled, "I'm not a god, so I can't do so many things. But after this time, Hideo realm probably needs to be in retreat for a while," she said quietly. "It takes time to rewrite the rules of heaven and earth, and during this period, if a powerful Hideo takes action, there is a high probability that it will affect the order of heaven and earth, and the age of immortals will not come." "It doesn't matter to me," Yao Meng smiled lightly. Now besides practicing, she has also found some new fun. This pleasure alone could keep her entertained for a long time. Even Musian might have to spend hundreds of millions more energy. "Is this why you gave the essence of the first demon emperor to the queen of the demon world?" Yao Meng asked. Concubine Shangyan pursed her red lips slightly, with a faint smile in her eyes. "That woman doesn't care whether the age of immortality comes or not. The essence of the first demon emperor can at least make her calm for a while." Yao Meng put down the teacup, glanced at the books on the table, opened them casually, took a few more glances, and then said, "Can you lend me this thing for 2 days?" A faint smile bloomed on Concubine Shangyan's beautiful face, and she said calmly, "I have already remembered the sample in my mind. Let this sample be regarded as a gift to you." Seeing that Yao Meng seemed to be planning to leave after putting away the books, Concubine Shangyan asked, "Are you going back?" Yao Meng looked sideways and said with a smile, "Isn't today the immortal assembly? Let's go and relax and see how the child is growing up. Watching the fellow Taoists around you gradually grow up will give you a pleasant sense of satisfaction. If the sect master has never experienced it, you can try it." Under Yao Meng's gaze, the sect leader's sister, who was wearing a black dress, had a mysterious temperament, picturesque features, and was as elegant as a flower, suddenly smiled sweetly. If I had the chance, I would try it. Meanwhile, on the other side. It's really strange, logically speaking, Your Majesty should not make such a small mistake. If she really favors Musian, how could he expose his involvement in the demon world? In front of the high platform, Yang Guhuan leaned on the seat and raised his head to stare at Musian, who was wielding a sword from the far end of the horizon, with a hint of solemnity and thoughtfulness in his eyes. After Emperor Qing came to join the Tao, he granted the first immortal fate to several people who had been kind to Musian in the past, and Yang Guhuan was naturally one of them. Now that she has reached the 8th stage of returning to the void, she is only one step away from enlightenment. Such strength naturally enhanced Yang Guhuan's perception, and since she was originally from the demon world, she was naturally very familiar with the aura emanating from Musian. Even though she was now at the 8th level of return to void, she was sincerely in awe of the aura emanating from him at this moment. Because in the eyes of others, Musian might not have changed at all, but for Yang Guhuan, it was as if a charming giant python was entangled behind Musian at this moment. Musian. At this time, the old man's indifferent voice came again on the stage. According to the rules, if the contestant did not arrive at the scene within one stick of incense, he would automatically be judged as a loser. And now, one stick of incense was about to burn out completely. Among the cultivators in the audience, many people looked up at the black spot in the air. Regardless of whether Musian was rushing here now, as long as the stick of incense burned out completely, he would not be able to participate in the subsequent Ascension Conference. For these people watching the show, this was undoubtedly a pity. After all, some people don't have much feeling about Musian's talent, and most of them know him through his Taoist partner and sister. Bairuoxi's talent and beauty are recognized by everyone, but Musian is different. In the final analysis, although most people don't say anything on the surface, they feel that this Taoist couple is not a good match. One is a girl of heaven who is very likely to impact the realm of enlightenment in the future, while the other has only reached the 4th level of soul refining so far. Even among the disciples of the sect, she is just an ordinary person with a little talent. During this period, cultivators from all over Jizu were impressed by the beauties in the sect, and when they knew that the inner disciple of Kanghai Peak already had a Taoist partner, they were naturally curious about the other party's identity. At this Ascension Conference, many people were waiting to see Musian's joke. No matter how good your popularity is in the sect, no matter how well you understand the ways of the world, what use can it be at the Ascension Conference? In the end, you still have to rely on yourself. If he is eliminated in the first match, the name Musian will become a joke for people to talk about after dinner. Of course, being eliminated late or being eliminated after fighting, the latter is naturally more topical. No matter what the reason, people hope to see Musian participate in the competition. Even the disciple of Kang Jian Peak on the stage at this moment is no exception. The incense on the stage gradually burned out, and the old man in front of the high stage raised his eyelids slightly. Boom! The figure in the distance turned into a stream of light at the end, accelerated and rushed over, and finally stopped steadily in the venue. Sorry, there was an accident on the road and I was a step late. Musian glanced at the incense not far away and smiled, but it seems that the time is just right. The old man nodded slightly, glanced at the Kangjian Peak disciples on the stage, and said, "Since everyone is here, let's get ready." In front of the high stage in the distance, Yan Ruyu's beautiful eyes gazed at Musian. Although her expression was indifferent, there was inevitably some worry in her eyes. Although I believe in Musian's ability, the disciple of Kangjian Peak is at least at the peak of the 5th level of soul refining, which is nearly 2 levels lower than Musian. If there is no martial arts assessment, it would be fine, but now Musian has fallen to the initial stage of the 4th level of soul refining because of the thunder tribulation. Such a gap is inevitably worrying. Ning Yuan, the head of Ziwimeng Peak, obviously noticed the worry in Yan Ruyu's eyes, and smiled. "Junior sister, you can relax. Many people from Zhuzhou came to this Ascension Conference. We should be united against the enemy. Even if Musian is really eliminated, there are still disciples of Ziwimeng Peak." Yan Ruyu smiled lightly and said, "Don't worry, senior brother, I believe in my disciple." After that, he ignored Ning Yuan and looked calmly at the high platform where Musian was. Ning Yuan opened his mouth, as if he wanted to say something, but when he saw Yan Ruyu's cold expression, he finally held back his inner thoughts. Seeing this, Yu Suanji, the head of Tianji Peak, couldn't help but chuckle. Although senior brother Ning has also reached the 6th level of Return to Void, he is probably not as good as Musian's disciple in pursuing female cultivators. Among the heads, Yan Ruyu is the youngest, and because of her beauty and intellectual temperament, she is very popular not only among the heads but also among the disciples. It's just that this woman has rarely had intimate interactions with other people from the past to the present. In the past, when she was still in Daofeng, she had a very close relationship with her senior sister Yuzian, but later they parted ways because of some disputes. Looking at the two people who were ready in front of the high platform in the distance, suddenly a head smiled and said, "Who do you think will be the final winner of this Ascension Conference?" "That will naturally be my disciple from Kanghai Peak Yi Hao," who was standing aside, said with a somewhat confident tone. He has great confidence in Bairuoxi's talent and strength. Even if there are many geniuses this time, Bairuoxi will definitely win in the end. Yuzian chuckled, "My two disciples are no less talented than Bairuoxi's disciple. If they really meet, it's not certain who will win." Among the cultivators of the same generation, apart from Lan Murian, no one can compare to my disciple Wei Mengru in terms of realm. The head of Huabao Peak laughed proudly. At this time, the 9 chiefs suddenly formed a sharp contrast. One side seemed to be smiling happily, while the other side was completely silent. In the past, when they were competing for these extremely talented inner disciples, they did not participate at all, but chose other more promising disciples. The reason was that they felt that doing so was too low in status. To put it bluntly, they did not want to be so aggressive, and it would cost a huge price to accept an inner disciple. But who would have thought that this Ascension Conference would become the focus of attention in Zhuzhou? The most important thing for the chief to accept disciples is fame, and one of the simplest ways to get fame is to make his disciples famous. If you can squeeze into the top 10 in this Ascension Conference, you can become famous. In the future, when everyone sees a genius disciple in the top 10 of the Ascension Conference, they will remember who taught this disciple. Just thinking about it makes them proud. And now, the chiefs who did not fight for those genius disciples in the past are regretting it. It should have been a good opportunity for their main peak to become famous, but for the sake of prestige, they can only watch other main peaks shine. But fortunately, no matter what, they still have a bottom-ranked one here. The chiefs and elders of several main peaks such as Kangjian Peak looked at the disciple Musian in front of the high platform in the distance intentionally or unintentionally. Even if their disciples were eliminated before the top 100 of the Ascension Conference, they were better than the disciple accepted by junior sister Yan. After all, most of the disciples they accepted were around the 5th level of Refining Spirit, and Musian was only at the 4th level of Refining Spirit now. And it was unfortunate that they ran into a genius disciple at the peak of the 5th level of Refining Spirit at the beginning. Musian seems to be losing to Yuan Ping. At this time, the deputy chief of Kangjian Peak suddenly spoke. Everyone looked at the high platform where Musian was. His spiritual energy was a little disordered at the moment, and he was breathing heavily. In front of Musian, nearly 30 swords surrounded him. As Yuan Ping raised his hands and made hand gestures, the flying swords continued to attack Musian. He just consumed a lot of spiritual energy on the road, and he probably hasn't recovered yet. Yuzian saw something and frowned. In such an important occasion as the Ascension Conference, his strength is not as good as Yuan Ping, and he was late for so long. He can't blame others for losing. Ning Yuan shook his head. Yuan Ping is a disciple of my Kang Jian Peak anyway. It's not shameful to lose to him. Xiaolin laughed heartily, and when he looked at Yuan Ping in front of the high platform, there was also a bit of satisfaction in his eyes. Then, he looked at Yan Ruyu and said with a smile, in fact, when junior sister chose Musian as an inner disciple so decisively, I thought junior sister had discovered his talent. But now it seems that junior sister may have simply liked him. Musian's performance at the moment is really disappointing, and it is no wonder that Xiaolin would gloat over his misfortune. Yuzian looked at Yan Ruyu with a smile and said, if junior sister regrets now, you can let him come to my Daofeng as an inner disciple later. Yan Ruyu looked indifferent, looking at the arena, not wanting to pay attention to them. At this moment, in front of the arena, Yuan Ping had his hands behind his back, with 9 swords surrounding him. He looked at Musian, who was surrounded by swords and still panting, and said with a smile, although Miss Bai is very talented, her vision in choosing a Taoist partner seems to be a little lacking. He had heard of Musian's name in the past, but it was not because of Musian's talent or anything, but because he learned that the beautiful girl from Canghai Peak actually had a Taoist partner, so he knew Musian. Although he would not directly find fault with Musian with his own qualities, Yuan Ping was still somewhat unconvinced in his heart. After all, in his opinion, Musian's talent was not worthy of a beauty like Bai Ruoxi. Musian looked around, looked at the sword blades surrounding him, looked at Yuan Ping nonchalantly, and said with a smile, love has nothing to do with talent. Brother Yuan seems to have some misunderstandings about feelings. Yuan Ping said with a hint of mockery in his eyes, Daimu is now a 4th-grade soul refiner, and if Miss Bai remembers correctly, she is already above the 7th-grade soul refiner, right? When she returns to the Void Realm in the future, she will experience more and her horizons will become higher. By then, she will dash. She will find that her husband Mu is such an excellent Taoist partner, Musian said with a smile. Being interrupted suddenly, Yuan Ping said with a hint of anger in his eyes, she will naturally know that there are many excellent cultivators in this world, and there are many choices to make. As the saying goes, a wife who has shared the hardships with you should not be abandoned, but, I seem to have put myself in the shoes of the heroine, anyway. He looked up at the disciple of Kang Jian Peak and smiled, I don't think I'm weak either. Weak or not, I have the final say now. Yuan Ping chuckled, raised his hand and made a gesture, and nearly 30 swords behind him rushed towards Musian. Maybe Musian's talent is not weak, but as long as Musian is eliminated in the first round of the Ascension Conference, it is easy to imagine how the disciples in the sect and the cultivators in Zhu will view Musian in the future. Seeing the sword blade coming at him, Musian opened his mouth slightly, You talk too much nonsense. Yuan Ping's eyes were cold. As the sword blade attacked Musian, he drew the sword behind him and rushed towards Musian. Musian took a step forward. And at this moment, the whole world turned grey. The sword blade stopped in mid-air, Yuan Ping's action of rushing towards Musian stopped, and the wind that blew past also stagnated in mid-air. After Wei Mengru obtained part of the power of the original witch, this power also indirectly became one of Musian's powers. 2 seconds later, time began to flow again. When Yuan Ping reacted, Musian had already appeared in front of him, and then, he punched out. The fist wind surged, and the simple punch shook Yuan Ping's internal organs and felt pain, and then the whole person flew out of the field like a cannonball. The old man in mid-air looked at this scene, his eyelids twitched slightly, and then he said calmly, Musian wins. The voices in the field were silent for a moment. Even the elders were stunned for a long time. What did Musian do in that short period of less than 2 seconds just now? Even these elders didn't react. The eyes of the several chiefs who were discussing the matter earlier also showed some surprise and doubt. Whether Musian had used a secret method or something else, even they couldn't figure it out now. At this time, Yuzian seemed to have noticed something and subconsciously looked behind her. Not far behind them, a peerless fairy in a green skirt was floating in the air. She was bare white jade feet, with a fairy-like temperament. Her clear and bright green eyes looked in the direction of Yuzian, and her expression was always calm. Yuzian's actions were naturally noticed by the other chiefs. When several people turned their heads to look, their hearts trembled slightly. The Green Emperor? Why is she here too? Not all the chiefs and elders knew the relationship between Yuzian and the Green Emperor. So far, only the few female chiefs who had discovered that Yuzian was born as a furnace cauldron knew the secret. But they did not mention it to others. Yanruyu looked at the young man on the stage and relaxed a little. Then, a faint smile appeared in her beautiful eyes. She glanced at Xiaolin and said with a smile, "Brother Xiao, if he is just a fourth-grade soul refiner, why should I accept him as an inner disciple?" Xiaolin frowned slightly and whispered, "Not only the library, he is also the disciple of the Green Emperor." Yanruyu had a meaningful smile in her eyes and did not answer. Xiaolin frowned slightly and looked at Yuzian on the stage again, then calmed down his heart a little and glanced at the fairy in the green skirt behind him. And this glance happened to see that the fairy had a faint smile on her lips at this moment. Her green eyes stared at the direction of Yuzian, and there seemed to be a hint of softness between her eyebrows, and some special emotions hidden in her eyes. "In the past, I did hear that Yuzian saved the life of the Green Emperor. It is not surprising that she accepted Yuzian as a disciple," Xiaolin thought. If so, it can explain why Sister Yan accepted Yuzian as her inner disciple in the past. After all, she later received the immortal fate given by the Green Emperor because of this relationship. When Xiaolin thought of this, he couldn't help but think of Yanruyu's meaningful eyes just now. He frowned, as if he thought of something, and then, as if a blue lightning flashed through his brain, his heart suddenly trembled, and subconsciously looked at Yuzian again, just to see him and the Green Emperor staring at each other. Logically speaking, even the heads of these people dared not look at the Green Emperor like this, so why would a cultivator in the refining spirit realm dare to be so disrespectful? Xiaolin's eyes flickered slightly, and he subconsciously looked at Yanruyu not far away, and an extremely absurd word flashed through his mind. Deist companion. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 308. It has only been less than an incense stick of time since the two sides started fighting, and Yuzian only took a few seconds to make a move. What happened in that nearly 2 seconds, even the several leaders on the stage didn't understand at this moment. But now there is something more worrying than this matter. From the beginning, the Green Emperor was looking at this place not far behind. Even if the people she was looking at were not them, it still made people feel a strange feeling. After the old man judged Yuzian's victory, Yao Meng also turned around and left quietly. If a Hedeo realm appeared rashly in such a place, it would cause a huge commotion and would also cause considerable psychological pressure on other contestants. After all, not everyone is like Yuzian, who can act recklessly towards the Hedeo realm empress. Yuzian bowed slightly to the old man on the stage, then got off the arena, and then looked at the high platform in the distance and bowed slightly in the direction of Yanruyu. Yanruyu smiled and nodded, but she couldn't help but look at Yuzian with a little more apology in her eyes. In the past, the reason why she chose Yuzian as an inner disciple was that her motives were not pure from the beginning. Seeing Yuzian's attitude again at this moment, she couldn't help but feel a little ashamed. Looking at Yuzian's figure going away, Yanruyu's eyes were full of thought, and at this time, Yuzian's eyes moved slightly, and suddenly whispered, "The spiritual energy between heaven and earth seems to be gradually becoming richer." Yanruyu raised her head and stared at the sky, and there seemed to be intertwined colorful lights in her eyes. After a while, her beautiful eyes flashed slightly, and she whispered, "The rules of heaven and earth are being rewritten. Maybe a new return to Void Realm will appear in the future. If so, the value of Yuzian in the future may be much higher than it is now." Originally, because of the immortal fate bestowed by the Green Emperor in the past, after several masters broke through that bottleneck, they did not encounter new bottlenecks in a short period of time. If they continue to practice like this, it is only a matter of time before they reach the peak of return to void. But because of the restrictions of heaven and earth, the peak of returning to the void is already the ultimate of cultivation. But now the rules of heaven and earth have been rewritten, and new enlightenment realms will be allowed to appear in the future. According to the constraints of the rules, there will be no more than 30 enlightenment realms in Jizhu. If you want to step into enlightenment, the fastest way is. Musian's spiritual energy is much richer than before. During this period of time, his natural furnace may have obtained some opportunities, Yuzian said softly. Yan Ruyu looked indifferent, just looking at the direction where Musian left. Her slender fingertips lightly touched her red lips, and her beautiful eyes showed a thoughtful look. After Musian left the arena, he looked around leisurely. At this moment, in the air, like a mirror rippling in the water, more than a dozen different areas appeared, and he saw several familiar figures in them. Musian's eyes first fell on Bairuoxi. When he saw a sword flash behind the beauty in the palace skirt, he quickly resolved the battle, and there was a little more admiration in his eyes. Ruoxi's strength is indeed much stronger than before. The battle of the same realm ended so quickly. And probably because of Gong Lianyu's influence, her temperament seems to be a little more dignified than before, giving people a sense of coldness that is difficult to approach. Musian just thought of this. At this moment, a pink mist suddenly flashed in front of his eyes, and that mist was emitted from Bairuoxi. Musian narrowed his eyes and stared at Bairuoxi in the picture for a few more times. He saw that Bairuoxi in the picture was wearing a white and elegant palace skirt, wrapping her graceful and tight body, and the golden sword energy behind her exuded amazing pressure. Behind Bairuoxi, it seemed that the shadow of four tails appeared vaguely. And on Bairuoxi's head, at this moment, a pair of fox ears that looked quite cute also appeared. Musian rubbed his eyes, but found that the shadow in front of him quietly shattered into powder, as if it had never existed. When Musian looked up again, Bairuoxi was still the same Bairuoxi, without any pink demonic aura or any demonic features. Is it my illusion? But it stands to reason that cultivators should not be dazzled. Musian glanced at the reactions of the cultivators around him, but found that no one seemed to notice the characteristics of Bairuoxi's demonic cultivation. Did I really see it wrong? Musian thought of this and was about to retract his gaze. At this moment, he suddenly saw the same demonic aura among the cultivators around him. The demon cultivator was hiding in the crowd and looked no different from ordinary cultivators, but in Musian's eyes, the cultivator completely showed his demonic side in front of him. It was not an illusion, but I could really see the demon cultivators who hid their identities in the sect. Musian turned his head slightly to look at Yingguhuan in front of the high platform in the distance. A monstrous demonic aura emerged from her back, pink and a little red, like a god descending to the world, enchanting and charming. As if she had noticed Musian's gaze, Yingguhuan looked over and then suddenly smiled softly. Musian's heart skipped a beat, and she smiled reservedly at her, then quietly withdrew her gaze. I can really see who the demon cultivators in the sect are. This should be the work of the demon queen, Musian thought to himself. The queen of the demon realm not long ago abducted his spiritual consciousness to the demon realm, and during that period he was in a coma for a period of time. During that time, the queen who charmed all living beings may have done something to him. When Musian thought of this, he looked up at Bairuoxi in the picture again, and his eyes became more thoughtful. The demon cultivators in the demon world have special means of hiding their demonic aura, and Her Majesty the Queen should be aware of this method. Maybe try asking her. But let's talk about it. How do you use this thing? After the first competition of the Immortal Ascension Conference was over, Musian returned to Tianhe Garden and took out the bronze mirror stored in the ring. The demonic aura of the other demon cultivators in the sect that I can see today must be caused by the Queen of the Demon Realm. This mirror is a gift from her, which also means that I have officially become one of her confidants. Mu Xian understands in his heart. Looking at the smooth mirror, he seemed to have thought of something. The spiritual energy in his body surged and quietly poured into the mirror. At that moment, Mu Xian felt that the surrounding environment turned dark in an instant, and he seemed to be falling straight out of the endless darkness uncontrollably. Slowly, a ray of light appeared in front of his eyes, and in that ray of light, he saw a very familiar figure. She is a woman in a black robe. She is wearing a black hood. Under the hood, a strand of silver hair can be vaguely seen. The tight black robe outlines her sexy curves. The lips under the hood reveal a sickly look. Like luster. The original witch? Why is she here? Isn't this mirror given to me by the Queen of the Demon Realm? She said that I could see her in my dreams through this mirror, but the person I saw turned out to be the original witch. Could it be that I was even thinking about her in my dreams? At this moment, Mu Xian's mind was filled with countless questions, and he was filled with confusion. Suddenly, the speed of his fall suddenly slowed down, and slowly, Mu Xian felt himself stepping on the floor. The tall demon queen appeared behind Mu Xian at some point and said faintly, "This mirror can reflect a person's heart. If you see the original witch, it also means that you have never forgotten her, even in your dreams. Zhongdu is eager to see her." Her voice was as calm as usual, and seemed to have a hint of charm. "This woman is born with an irresistible charm, but if you are really addicted to her, you may be completely devoured without even knowing it." For a moment, Mu Xian was almost intoxicated, but the rings and necklaces he wore immediately had a refreshing effect. He calmed down slightly and turned around to look. "Your Majesty just said that I have never forgotten the original witch, but I haven't been thinking about her during this time." The Queen of the Demon Realm took a deep look at Mu Xian, and there was a hint of meaning in her magnificent purple eyes like stars. "This mirror can reflect a person's heart and will materialize his inner desires in a dream. It means that I can do whatever I want to the person in my heart in this dream." Mu Xian asked, "Your Majesty means that the person I care about most in my heart right now is the original witch, and I myself not aware?" When he said this, he couldn't help but look at the demon queen again. The ruler of the demon world looks like a royal sister. Her hair sets off her voluptuous and beautiful face. She wears a light purple dress with blooming purple flowers embroidered on it. The ribbon around her waist outlines her sexy and enchanting look. Her figure is extremely charming. It is difficult to control such a woman, but if I can really get her love one day, I will probably be so happy that I can't breathe, Mu Xian thought to himself. In terms of body proportions alone, the Queen of the Demon Realm is probably the most perfect among the women Mu Xian knows. If placed in modern times, the Queen of the Demon Realm would be even taller than Mu Xian if she wore high heels. At this time, Mu Xian suddenly noticed the gaze cast by the woman opposite him. He looked up and saw a trace of amusement in the beautiful eyes of the Queen of the Demon Realm, looking him up and down, as if to say, "Are you brave?" Mu Xian's eyelids twitched slightly. Super, she can read minds in dreams. When he thought of this, he immediately felt helpless. Sometimes people can't control their thoughts, especially when they see such a charming and graceful woman standing in front of them. Some random thoughts will naturally arise in their hearts. Fortunately, the Queen of the Demon Realm didn't seem to care about these trivial matters. She pursed her seductive red lips, and her eyes were full of charm. "Not long after you returned to Liangyi sect, you came to see me again in a hurry. Do you have anything to say?" Mu Xian calmed down a little, and then gave a general explanation of Bai Ruoxi's demonic aura. If Ruoxi enters the realm of returning to the void in the future, the demonic energy will be difficult to suppress. Since your Majesty can send demon cultivators to the Liangyi sect to hide their identities, it seems that there should be some special means to hide the demonic energy, Mu Xian asked. Asking the Queen of the Demon Realm about this matter is less stressful. If you ask Yao Meng, on the one hand, she may not know that much about the demon cultivator. On the other hand, their relationship is so ambiguous now, and it is difficult for them to express their feelings for each other so sincerely in front of a woman. A woman's love, isn't this seeking death? But the queen of the demon realm is different. He and the queen of the demon realm have a superior subordinate relationship, so naturally he has no such concerns. By Ruoxi? Is she your little girlfriend? The queen of the demon realm recalled the beauty in the palace skirt she saw in the martial realm that day, and there was a hint of danger in her charming eyes. You came to me for help with her matter? Who is whose subordinate? Also, you express the worry and love of another woman in front of a woman without any concealment. Should I say that you are eager to protect your wife, or do you not take me seriously at all? Musian couldn't help but smile bitterly when he heard it. Your Majesty is the most beautiful woman in the world. To be honest, I think no man can resist your charm. I think this mind-reading skill has already told you the answer. But it is precisely because of your identity, so. Musian shook his head and sighed from the bottom of his heart. This time he sighed sincerely, because he did have some regrets at this moment. The queen of the demon realm is such a strong queen, and she can also read minds. If he wants to conquer her, the difficulty is probably hell level. The queen of the demon realm slightly moved the corners of her mouth, but maintained her usual indifference. This scene can probably be remade into a classic short film called, Self-Cultivation of the Movie Queen. At this time, she suddenly said, I do know how to hide the demonic energy. Even if it is the thunder tribulation of returning to the void or even the enlightenment realm in the future, the demonic energy will not be leaked. The nine-tailed fox has appeared in the demon world in the past, and I also know the secret of the evolution of the nine-tailed fox. Musian's eyes lit up slightly, and he looked up at the queen of the demon world. The other party would say this, which means that she really intends to help him. What does your Majesty need me to do? Musian asked. He is a smart man, and naturally understands the meaning of the words of the queen of the demon world. She wants to get something from him, and in exchange, she will tell him the means of hiding the demonic energy and the secret of the evolution of the nine-tailed fox. The queen of the demon realm was stunned for a moment, then a hint of charm flashed in her beautiful eyes, and she chuckled, if I must say, you do have something I want. There is still an imperial-level medicinal material in your natural furnace. She looked at Musian's body casually, use it as an exchange. That's no problem, but how can I give it to you? Musian asked. He naturally didn't believe that such a proud existence as the queen of the demon realm would be willing to use dual cultivation and other means to exchange imperial-level medicinal materials with him. Maybe she has some special secret methods to directly extract the imperial-level medicinal materials in the natural furnace. The queen of the demon realm raised her slender and delicate little jade hand and hooked her finger, come here. Although he had doubts in his heart, Musian still walked slowly to her and said, then what? The queen of the demon realm's seductive red lips slightly raised a charming arc, and she looked down at him slightly, hold me. Musian was startled and fell into a brief contemplation. Did I hear it wrong? Don't worry, I won't hurt you, nor will I do anything out of line, the queen of the demon realm said softly. I just wanted to tell her. Little bitch, I'm back. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 309. Dagan Dynasty. The old emperor woke up from his meditation. The empty hall was quiet, with only the eunuch standing beside him as a guardian. There was no one in this huge palace. The concubines, queens, and even palace maids were all driven out of the palace by the old emperor in the past. The Dagan emperor had been abstinent for more than 10 years. Now he is 60 years old. In the past, he recruited Gu Boxing as the Dagan state master and followed him to practice, just for immortality, becoming the first emperor to achieve immortality from ancient times to the present. The other emperors of Zhou had 3,000 concubines, but the old emperor of the Dagan dynasty in Dongzhou became a cultivator, with his heart set on immortality, so that he could control the dynasty for longer and longer. Naturally, there were complaints, but he was the emperor of Dagan. No matter how dissatisfied you were, you could only hide your dissatisfaction in your heart. As for the death remonstrances of the ministers, yes, but very few. There are constant factional disputes in the court now, and everything was caused by the old emperor. Only when there are disputes in the court can he, the emperor, sit more securely. Your Majesty, have you finished meditating? The eunuch next to him reacted immediately and came to the soft couch in a panic. Unexpectedly, the old emperor stood up with an excited look on his face, strode out of the bedroom, raised his head and stared at the sky. To ordinary people, it seemed that there was nothing, but he had practiced Taoism for more than 10 years, so he naturally saw things that ordinary people could not see. Spiritual energy. Rich spiritual energy is filling this dynasty. The Dagan emperor calmed down a little, exhaled slowly, and said, "Go and ask someone to invite the national teacher to come, I have something to discuss with him." After a while, a man in a Taoist robe with a resolute face strode into the hall. The old emperor stood up and greeted him, raised his hand to dismiss the eunuch, and said, "National master." Before he finished speaking, Gu Boxing nodded slightly, "I already know what your Majesty wants to say. The death of the first demon emperor ushered in the era of immortals. Now the rules of heaven and earth are being rewritten. In the future, the spiritual energy between this world will be enough for me to comprehend the rhyme of Tao and enter the realm of enlightenment." The old emperor heard this, and a gleam of light flashed in his eyes. If the future national master is promoted to enlightenment. Gu Boxing seemed to know what the old emperor wanted to say, and smiled, "When I enter the realm of enlightenment, your Majesty can also use the power of the dynasty to live forever. Not to say that he will live forever, but at least he can rule this dynasty for another 1,000 years. The emperor of Dagan was very pleased to hear this, and laughed, "That's great." However, at this time, Gu Boxing paused for a while, and then said faintly, "But before that, your Majesty's dynasty will probably be the first to collapse." The old emperor was stunned. After a moment, he frowned and said, "What do you mean, Imperial Master?" Gu Boxing looked at the old emperor deeply and said, "Your Majesty, it seems that you haven't remembered yet? About the matter of the body of doom." The old emperor frowned and stared at Gu Boxing without saying anything. It is rumored that the leader of Lianji sect is proficient in the secrets of the 9 peaks and has insight into the secrets of heaven. If the rules of heaven and earth had not been rewritten this time, I am afraid that even I would have forgotten about the body of doom. Gu Boxing said in a low voice with awe. What the Imperial Master means is, we have tracked down who the owner of the body of doom is, but the memory has been blocked, the old emperor reacted and asked. Gu Boxing nodded slightly, "Your Majesty should still remember Musian, right? The young master of the Mu family who injured the third prince, the maid beside him is the body of doom." He also remembered these things that were blocked from the secrets after the rules of heaven and earth were rewritten not long ago. Wei Mengru is the body of doom. He wanted to take Wei Mengru away before, but was stopped by the queen of the demon realm. And the reason for the other party's action was for a little cultivator? Even a fool would not believe it. There is no doubt that the queen of the demon realm saved Wei Mengru. The biggest possibility is to let the body of doom devour the entire dynasty. After that, the demon world can invade Dongzhou on a large scale. The old emperor frowned. If it is really that the sect master who erased the memory of the body of doom, doesn't it mean that she wants to save the little maid? If so, we can only cooperate with others over there, Gu Boxing said faintly. It's hard for the Dagan dynasty to shake the position of the Lianji sect, but just because the Dogon dynasty can't do it doesn't mean that others can't do it either. The Dogon emperor frowned slightly, as if he was thinking deeply. At this time, Gu Boxing said again, but before that, I need to make one last attempt. If it works, there's no need to seek cooperation with others. What does the national master mean? I have a secret method that can sneak into other people's dreams silently and bring their spiritual consciousness out of the dream. Gu Boxing smiled lightly and said, if the real body enters the sect, it will be noticed at the first time, but as long as it's not the real body, it won't be so easy to be noticed. If according to what the national master said just now, the last time you went to the martial world, you were stopped by the queen of the demon world, the Dogon emperor seemed to be worried about something, and he hesitated to speak. Gu Boxing nodded slightly and said, from the perspective of interests, the queen of the demon realm naturally does not want Wei Mengru to be taken away by us. The body of misfortune will affect the luck of the dynasty. If the luck of the dynasty can be solved through Wei Mengru, it will be disadvantageous to the demon world from the overall perspective. After all, the luck blessing of the Dogon dynasty will also indirectly help the Dongzhou cultivators. To put it bluntly, in Dongzhou, cultivators with Dongzhou blood have additional luck blessings, including the great masters of the Hedao realm. If the queen of the demon realm wants to capture Dongzhou in the future, the first thing she needs to deal with is the fate of the Dacian dynasty. However, this is Dongzhou after all, and Wei Mengru is still in the Lianji section. A confident smile soon appeared on Gu Boxing's face. Does your majesty think that the queen of the demon realm can still stay in Lianji sect to protect Musian? In the final analysis, that being was so arrogant that he never looked at the sentient beings on earth. No matter how much he valued Wei Mengru, he could not personally guard Wei Mengru. What's more, there was Lianji sect there, and it was impossible for concubine Shangyan to let the queen of the demon realm stay in Lianji sect. This time's plan has at least a 90% chance of success. The queen of the demon realm, Musian had met her several times in the past, but every time he faced the ruler of the demon realm, Musian was wary from the bottom of his heart. The other party has the ability to catch Max by reading his mind. The queen of the demon realm probably knows exactly what he is thinking. Maybe one day when he faced this sexy and charming young mature woman, some bold ideas came to his mind, and Her Majesty the Queen immediately used her head as a stool to sit on her. Because of this, even though Musian was holding his hands tightly around the plump waist of the queen of the demon realm, he still maintained his rationality and freed his mind as much as possible. Even so, the unique soft fragrance of young mature women is mixed with a special charm, which makes people feel as if they can't help but be addicted to it. On the other side, the queen of the demon realm closed her eyes slightly, seeming to recall the difference between the warm embrace of Musian she felt in the past and her current embrace. After a while, she slowly opened her eyes and saw Musian's gentlemanly appearance, with a faint smile in his eyes, her red lips close to his ear, and she whispered softly, "Relax a little, am I that terrible?" At this moment, there is no way to read any useful thoughts from Musian's mind. In a sense, Musian's method of emptying his brain is really amazing. Probably none of the Buddhas in the western regions is as calm as Musian is now. Musian turned his head slightly and said reservedly, "Your Majesty knows how to read minds. I just want to avoid having some disrespectful thoughts towards you." The queen of the demon realm stared directly at him and chuckled, "I can't read other people's hearts all the time, not to mention, your disrespect is also a recognition of my charm. If you say that, I won't feel sleepy anymore." Musian turned his head slightly and met those seductive eyes. "Does your Majesty really mean what he said?" His hands were still wrapped around the soft waist of the queen of the demon realm, and he had been suppressing the urge to move his hands downwards from the beginning. The queen of the demon realm smiled charmingly, "I'm not stingy to that extent. In addition, since you stepped into this hall, I have never had a crush on you." Musian said, "Oh," looking thoughtful, but still very reserved. In the final analysis, he was still skeptical, and he was afraid that this young mature woman would turn her back on him if he imagined some scenes in his mind. Although this is a dream, Hideyomites' methods are simply unimaginable. How long will it take to complete the transfer of imperial medicinal materials? Musian suddenly asked. The queen of the demon realm narrowed her eyes and said with a charming smile, "Why do you have such a strange idea? Even I can't directly transfer what you refined in the Tian furnace." Musian was slightly startled. "Then why did you let me hug you? The contact between you and me will allow me to confirm how far your natural furnace has grown." The queen of the demon realm raised her fingertips, and a gorgeous purple petal appeared in her palm. "This is hydrangea, and it is also a refined shielding magic weapon. After wearing it, no one can detect the evil spirit of the carrier." She handed the hydrangea to Musian and continued, "As for the evolution method of the nine-tailed fox, a pill is needed." Musian released his arms around the queen of the demon realm, put away the hydrangeas, and humbly asked, "What kind of elixir?" "9-grade elixir, Tegzudan." The queen of the demon realm said, "You can see the medicinal materials required for it in any ancient book on elixirs, but there are only a handful of people in the world who can refine this elixir. After all, if the other party knows that what you want to refine is Tegzudan, they will definitely reject your request. Tegzu pill is an extremely special pill. It has only one effect, which is to allow the demon to complete an evolution. No one would be willing to let a person with invincible potential appear in this world out of thin air. What's more, Biruoxi was originally in the Hedeo realm in the past, and she has the blood of the nine-tailed fox in this life. If the two talents are combined, it's scary to think about it." Musian pondered for a moment and said, "Your Majesty, does he know who can refine the Tegzu pill?" The queen of the demon realm said calmly, "Luotan." Luotan, Musian recalled it in his mind, remembering the imperial sister wearing a white skirt with gold thread and black stockings and beautiful legs, and then he was suddenly stunned. "I remember that she had asked her servants to write a letter to invite me to the South Bank, and then I was kidnapped." Musian was stunned. "Damn it, did I let someone else's pigeon go?" "What's wrong?" Seeing that Musian was deep in thought, the queen of the demon realm couldn't help but ask. Muji calmed down, glanced at the queen of the demon realm in a subtle mood, and said, "It's okay, I just remembered something subtle." Seeing the queen of the demon world acting like this, he now had reason to believe that the other party had indeed not read her heart. After the rules of heaven and earth are rewritten, the secrets of heaven that were blocked in the past will also disappear, the queen of the demon realm suddenly said, intentionally or unintentionally. Musian's eyes moved slightly. "What do you mean by your Majesty's words?" The queen of the demon realm did not answer directly, but asked instead, "The body of doom is very important to the Dacian dynasty. Why do you think Gu Boxing didn't come to trouble you again after returning to the dynasty?" After Musian pondered for a long time, a flash of lightning seemed to flash across his mind, and he raised his head and said, "What your Majesty means is that in the past, the matter of the body of misfortune was blocked, so they all forgot that Sister Mengru was the body of misfortune." Body. But after the rules of heaven and earth are rewritten, the secret of heaven is leaked, and the keyword body of doom will reappear in people's minds. At first, Musian felt that Gu Boxing was afraid of the power of the Liangyi sect, so he chose to stay dormant temporarily, but now that he thought about it carefully, the Liangyi sect was the most sacred place in Dongzhou and a neutral force. There was no reason to have conflicts with other forces. Conflict. After all, a large part of the reason why other forces in Dongzhou and even Kyushu respect Liangyi sect so much is because it is completely neutral. Unless the disciples of the sect are attacked. But Wei Mengru has a special status. What if Gu Boxing came to the sect, explained his interests and risks, and promised to the sect that he would not harm Wei Mengru? Will the sect still protect Wei Mengru at that time? "Does your Majesty know who Gu Boxing is?" Musian asked humbly. "In the past, there was an unknown young man who was lucky enough to gain some fortune in the world sea. Later, he was invited by the Emperor of Dakian to become a national teacher. He has cultivated to this day with the resources of the power of a country. The Queen of the Demon Realm said calmly, he is good at deductions. Tianji, dream killing technique, I dared to attack you in the martial arts world before, probably because of the blessings of all beings brought by the people behind me. Musian's eyes looked a little more thoughtful. At this time, the Queen of the Demon Realm continued, Dakian dynasty will not give up on the matter of the body of doom. And concubine Shangyan has the final say in Lianji sect alone. Of course, if she is willing to come forward and do her best to protect you, of course it's possible for a maid, but your maid won't do this if she's not related to her. With your character, there is a high probability that you will not leave your maid alone. She stared at Musian, her beautiful eyes flashing slightly, not knowing what she was thinking. Musian was silent. However, there is actually a very simple solution right now, the Queen of the Demon Realm said suddenly. Musian glanced at her, Your Majesty, please clarify. The Queen of the Demon Realm raised her red lips slightly and said, Follow me back to Bizhu. Musian said calmly, Your Majesty, aren't you worried that the body of bad luck will affect your destiny in the demon world? Only a weak person would make excuses to shift the blame onto one person. The Queen of the Demon Realm said indifferently, The old emperor is addicted to monasticism, and the decline of the dynasty will be a matter of time, but if it is the demon realm, it is not difficult to accommodate you two masters and servants. Musian pondered for a moment and said sincerely, Thank you for your kindness, Your Majesty. I will seriously consider this matter from now on. The Queen of the Demon Realm would value him so much, presumably because of the natural furnace cauldron and Waymengru's potential. However, if possible, Musian would naturally not want to leave Dongzhou. After all, his wife is here. Speaking of which, it seems that the imperial medicinal herb is still in my body, Musian asked tentatively, Don't you want it? Don't worry, the imperial medicinal materials will be left at your place for now. The Queen of the Demon World traced a charming curve on her lips, and looked at him deeply, I will take away the imperial medicinal materials in the future, but before that, I will keep them with you. After all, she wanted more than just imperial medicinal materials. Demon World. The Queen of the Demon Realm was wearing a complicated and gorgeous light purple dress. She leaned lazily in front of the throne and slowly opened her eyes. The second seater stood respectfully under the stage with a dignified and classic posture, and said respectfully, Your Majesty, you are awake. The Queen of the Demon Realm softly said You rarely enter dreams. Could it be that Musian just now, the second seat tried to guess? I will make some transactions with him. As a price, Musian will exchange the emperor-level medicinal materials in the natural furnace cauldron, the Queen of the Demon Realm said calmly. The second lady frowned slightly and said, What a rude guy. Neither the spiritual energy nor the medicinal materials of the natural furnace cauldron can be given directly to others. It requires double cultivation before it can be handed over to the other party, even the Queen of the Demon Realm is no exception. Doesn't Musian's suggestion indirectly mean that he wants to fall in love with the Empress of the Demon World? Your Majesty is a little too tolerant of that, Musian, the second seat whispered. If others dared to be so disrespectful in the past, I'm afraid they would all be dash. The Queen of the Demon Realm glanced at her lightly, I was the one who proposed the deal. The sound stopped suddenly. The second seat looked at the Empress sitting lazily in front of the high platform and was obviously stunned for a moment. After a moment, she came to her senses and said, With your cauldron and the unrefined first-generation demon emperor essence, you shouldn't need an emperor-level medicinal material. Why? Emperor-level medicinal materials are useful to me, but they have little effect, the Queen of the Demon Realm said calmly. Then why? The second seat hesitated. The Queen of the Demon Realm pondered for a moment, looked at the second seat, and said, To put it simply, I want to him. Second seat. I want to him, the queen of the demon realm said again, fearing that the second seat didn't hear clearly. The maid stood motionless under the stage like a sculpture, as if she would disappear with the wind at any time. After being in a trance for a long time, the second seat came back to her senses, tried to calm down, suppressed the throbbing in her heart, and said, although I don't know what your majesty likes about him, but if you like him, wouldn't it be better to bring him directly to the demon world? I don't want him as a person. The queen of the demon realm chuckled, I want everything. Whether it's a person or a heart. In short, to mold Musian into the shape she likes. For this, she needs an opportunity. Then after you retreat, do I need to do anything else? Asked the second seat. The queen of the demon realm shook her head, do nothing. If possible, I hope Dongzhou would do nothing. As long as they do nothing, they can get Musian, and even let him remember the kindness of the queen of the demon realm, but the premise is, Lianji sect will do nothing at that time. After Musian put away the bronze mirror, he took a look at the charming hydrangea in his hand. Then, he seemed to notice something and looked up at the shadow not far away. Sister Mengru, didn't you go to the Ascension conference? Although it was winter, Wei Mengru's clothes were not very thick. The gorgeous yellow skirt was close to her graceful body, and she was wearing a snow-white coat. Just one glance could feel the size of Wei Mengru, which was enough to be called a great mind. Although not as good as Biruoxi, it was just the level that could be controlled by both hands. It's just a competition, it will be a quick thing, Wei Mengru said lightly. Then, her eyes fell directly on the hydrangea in Musian's hand, with a hint of doubt in her eyes. Where did you get this flower? When her young master fell asleep on the table just now, he clearly had nothing in his hand, but now he had a hydrangea from the demon world in his hand. It was really a bit strange. Just got it from the demon queen, Musian said with a smile. Wei Mengru uttered a huh, obviously not believing it. Sister Mengru is really great whether she is aloof or charming, Musian coughed and said, are Ruoxi and the others back? Wei Mengru shook her head, still in the south bank, it shouldn't be so soon. When she said this, she looked at Musian twice more intentionally or unintentionally. Since she took the initiative to express her feelings to Musian last time, she has not found a suitable way to get along with her young master. She has been with him for such a long time, but she is still a little uncomfortable. Therefore, the relationship between the two seems a little ambiguous at the moment. But just because Wei Mengru was thin-skinned and not used to it, it didn't mean that Musian wasn't used to it either. He held Wei Mengru's slightly cool and soft little hand openly, and gently pulled her into his arms. While the maid's hips were gently pressed down, Musian skillfully wrapped his arms around Wei Mengru's soft waist, lowered his head and buried it in her drooping hair, greedily sniffing the fragrance of the maid. Wei Mengru's cold face was unconsciously stained with two seductive blushes. She gently pressed down Musian's palm that was climbing up, glanced at Musian, and said, are you a pervert? Would anyone keep smelling the smell of others like this? Musian silently stared at Wei Mengru, and her delicate face with a little light makeup. Wei Mengru without makeup was already a beauty in the world, and she added a bit of fireworks and a faint fragrance with light makeup, enough to be among the ranks of peerless beauties. Musian's eyes quickly fell on Wei Mengru's bright and attractive red lips painted with rouge, and said, changed rouge again. Are you born in the year of the dog? Can you tell this? Wei Mengru twisted her body in his arms a little uncomfortably, but this action not only failed to break free from Musian's arms, but made Musian's eyes more fiery. He inadvertently looked down at the maid's slender legs that were slightly lifted up because of the struggle just now, and thought that she was really worthy of being Sister Mengru, and a small action was so attractive. Although the black and white silk legs were great before, even without black silk, white silk would have a different flavor. After all, this time without the obstruction of silk, you can more accurately feel the delicate, white, smooth, and soft touch. After admiring her from head to toe for a long time, he finally couldn't help looking at Wei Mengru's increasingly blushing face. He lowered his head and gently bit Wei Mengru's cherry lips, staring at her affectionately and said, "Sister Mengru, let's sleep together tonight." Wei Mengru's eyes suddenly widened a little, and she suddenly woke up from her confusion. When she noticed Musian's burning gaze, her heart couldn't help but tremble. She couldn't help but lower her eyelids slightly, and her long and curled eyelashes trembled slightly. "I didn't accept it, but I didn't refuse it either." But for Musian, this meant consent. Happy New Year to everyone in advance. Today is the 31st. If you have tickets and blades, please vote for me after 12 o'clock in the evening. The blades and monthly tickets will be reset. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 311. For Musian, Wei Mengru's position is extremely special. When he was still in Tianqian City, Wei Mengru had been protecting him secretly, but at that time, Wei Mengru had visibly despised and looked down on him. The reason for this was naturally because Musian was a playboy at that time, and every day he was obsessed with women and nagging. Even though Wei Mengru's opinion of Musian changed later, there was still one impression that had not changed until now, LSP. Even though Musian had changed, his nature remained unchanged. In the past, even Musian would not have thought that he would be able to be with Wei Mengru one day. Wei Mengru's answer seemed ambiguous at this moment, but in fact, for Musian, she neither refused nor accepted, which was the same as accepting. After all, although Wei Mengru did not agree to sleep with him at this moment, didn't she also not leave the room? And this itself was a tacit signal. Musian stared at Wei Mengru's reserved and cold profile. She seemed a little uncomfortable with the ambiguous atmosphere in the room at the moment. She put her hands in front of her knees and gently grasped the hem of her skirt. Musian skillfully held one of her little hands. The touch of the slightly cool and soft little hand made Musian recall that Wei Mengru used such a little hand to help him guide his spiritual energy that day. For a moment, he was even more moved, and he wanted to suppress her directly on the bed at this moment. Musian suppressed the impulse in his heart and said softly, "Sister Mengru, let's rest early." Although she tried her best to restrain the heat in her eyes, Wei Mengru still noticed something. She glanced at Musian and warned in a low voice, "Let's make it clear first, it's still during the Ascension Conference, and there will be a competition tomorrow. Even if you stay in your room, you can only meditate, you must not mess around." At the end, she lowered her head slightly. Musian subconsciously glanced at Wei Mengru's snow-white and slender legs under her skirt, which looked even more beautiful because of the yellow skirt. He calmly retracted his gaze, nodded, and said seriously, "Don't worry, Sister Mengru, I know my limits and will never do anything wrong." Well, although he said so, Musian's eyes were already eager to move. And after they really got into bed, it might not be that Musian really took the initiative. As for the so-called Ascension Conference competition, with the spiritual energy of Musian's natural furnace, even if Wei Mengru did not sleep all night tonight, her spiritual energy would not be weakened the next day. After all, the spiritual energy blessing of the natural furnace is far greater than the normal meditation practice of the cultivator. Seeing that Wei Mengru did not seem to have the most basic trust in others, Musian simply took a half step forward, and then under Wei Mengru's doubtful eyes, he slightly bent down, dragged her knee with one hand, and put the other hand on the back of her neck, and directly hugged her horizontally. Wei Mengru reacted immediately, her beautiful eyes were cold, and she gently hit his shoulder, "Let go, I can walk by myself." If she was fighting with others on weekdays, Wei Mengru would be able to break free easily from such restraints, but for some reason, her struggle today was extremely slight, and she was completely unable to break free from Musian's arms. The slight twisting of her body was more like acting like a spoiled child. It must be said that the contrast brought by the helpless and shy posture of the usually cold maid made Musian, who has been wandering among flowers for many years, feel excited. Aware of Musian's fiery gaze, Wei Mengru felt ashamed, but her face was covered with frost, and she tried her best to maintain her cold image. "Are you going to break your promise?" she asked coldly, but she never dared to look Musian in the eye. Musian shook his head and smiled, "Of course not, we are just sleeping together tonight, I will never do anything." Although he himself did not believe this, he would not do anything too outrageous in the next few days. After all, during the Ascension Conference, the strengths from all over Jiuzhu poured in, and the sect is now full of good and bad people. Although I don't think anyone dares to cause trouble in a place like Lianji sect, but, some people can do anything for the body of misfortune. Sister Mengru won't be shy, right? Musian suddenly said. When Wei Mengru heard this, she immediately glanced at him, and her contemptuous eyes seemed to say, "Just you." Musian smiled without saying anything, just hugged her horizontally and looked down at the eyes of the maid tenderly. As if to prove that she was not shy, Wei Mengru's gorgeous and bright eyes reflected Musian's handsome face, and her eyes met his. Under the flickering candlelight, Wei Mengru's eyes seemed to be shining. After an unknown amount of time, Wei Mengru's slender hands grasping Musian's arm increased their strength, and her nails seemed to be gently embedded in his arm. Her beautiful hair set off her jade-like face, and her pretty face slowly became stained with two seductive blushes like drunkenness. Then, she silently buried her face in Musian's arms. You won." A subtle voice came from the room, which was almost inaudible, but was completely heard by Musian. For a moment, even Musian suspected that he had heard it wrong. He looked down at the beauty in his arms, and her snow-white jade feet gently swaying in the air, and whispered, "Are you shy?" Wei Mengru never raised her head, but just said in a low voice. "Damn it, who can withstand this?" Muse Hainan's heart wavered, and he could no longer suppress his inner impulse. He stepped to the edge of the bed and gently placed the beauty in his arms on the bed. Wei Mengru supported her soft body and wanted to get up from the bed, but Musian immediately pressed her wrist, lowered her head slightly, and stared at Wei Mengru's cold face and the delicate red lips painted with pink rouge. He closed the curtains, lowered his head slightly in the hazy bed, and kissed her beautiful face, then gradually touched her lips along her face, and then down to her snow-white jade neck, which was as proud as a swan. Wei Mengru's eyes gradually blurred, and her eyes were filled with an emotional moist luster. Her hands made movements as if she wanted to push Musian away, but for some reason, even the movement of pushing him away seemed a little weak. He was obviously at the peak of God refining, but at this moment he looked like an ordinary person. Wei Mengru opened her eyes slightly and looked at Musian, who had turned into a licking dog at this moment. Her eyes gradually became misty. Musian put his arms around Wei Mengru's slender waist, leaned slightly to her ear, and whispered, "Sister Mengru, is that okay?" Wei Mengru remained silent. Musian climbed up with his hands and played with it leisurely. Wei Mengru's heart trembled, and she finally opened her eyes, just in time to see Musian's affectionate eyes staring directly at her. She subconsciously turned her face away, leaving only an elegant jade neck curve for Musian, and avoided it. Those burning eyes. "We have made an appointment. Today we can only meditate and practice, well." The voice suddenly stopped, and her red lips were sealed by Musian's lips again. Her beautiful eyes slowly opened wide. Although she was surprised, for some reason, she was not very surprised. After all, this guy is very good at lying, and he has deceived by Ruoxi like this before. Wei Mengru stared at Musian quietly, and slowly, gently placed her hands on his waist. Just when Musian thought she was in love, he pinched her hard with her delicate fingers. The sudden pain made Musian almost scream out, but when he noticed Wei Mengru's disdainful look, he quickly calmed down and still stared at her tenderly, with a look of "as long as he deserves it, it's Sister Mengru. Even if she steps on me, I don't have a problem with her affectionate expression." Wei Mengru fell into silence for a long time, her heart slightly rippled, and her eyes that were originally mixed with contempt gradually softened. She slowly closed her eyes, seemingly feeling the warmth of Musian's body. After a while, their lips parted, and Wei Mengru hesitated. Don't touch the skirt. What if it gets torn? I'm just curious about where the buttons of this dress are, nothing else. Musian was very exploratory and lowered his head to study carefully. Wei Mengru's eyes flashed slightly and she whispered, there are no buttons, it's the ribbon on the waist. I just told you but didn't let you actually untie it. If you touch me again, don't blame me for being rude. Nearly half an hour later, Wei Mengru stood up from the bed with her soft body supported by one hand. After silently tidying up her messy clothes and hair, she turned to stare at the young man behind her. Is this what you said you wouldn't do tonight? Musian coughed lightly and said, you may not believe me, because you are too charming. Blame me. Wei Mengru glanced at him sideways, but when she saw his sincere eyes, she couldn't help but pursed her lips, suppressing the corners of her lips that wanted to rise. It turns out that being praised is such a happy thing. Obviously when I watched Musian say those love words to Bairu Oxy before, I just felt disgusting and despicable. But when I heard Musian's sincere words, I still couldn't help but jump for joy. Facts have proven that the perspective of a bystander and personal experience are completely different things. Just when Wei Mengru thought Musian would continue, she saw him take out a bronze mirror from the ring. Wei Mengru calmed down a little and asked doubtfully, what is this? The queen of the demon world left me a bronze mirror. Through it, I can directly call her in the demon world and even talk to her, Musian said. During the Immortal Ascension conference in the past few days, it is also the best time for certain forces to fish in troubled waters. He placed the bronze mirror in Wei Mengru's palm, raised his hand to straighten her clothes, and said with a smile, I am that fish, but so are you now. You are a natural furnace, so there are many people who want to get you, but I am different from you. Wei Mengru said softly. Musian shook his head and smiled, not to mention other people, there is just one person who wants you, isn't there? Wei Mengru glanced at him and wanted to taunt him, but thinking of what happened tonight, she fell silent for a moment. What does the fishing in troubled waters you mentioned have to do with this bronze mirror? Sister Mengru, have you ever heard of the dream-killing technique? Musian asked. Wei Mengru's eyes moved slightly, she raised her eyes and whispered softly, a secret technique that can directly sneak into other people's dreams. Musian played with Wei Mengru's hair scattered on her back. The previous tutor must have told the Dacian dynasty about Sister Lin Ling's stay in Tianhe Garden. Even a fool would not dare to step into Tianhe Garden. Although the spirit dragon is cute, it does not mean that even Musian and Wei Mengru are indifferent to being taken away. If the outside forces directly step into Tianhe Garden, they may not be annihilated directly. Use this mirror to fight against Gu boxing, Wei Mengru whispered to herself. But if the queen of the demon realm knows about this, Musian said firmly, she will help us. Even the queen of the demon realm does not want the body of doom to fall into the hands of the Dacian dynasty, not to mention the relationship between Musian and Musian. The previous queen of the demon realm had sincerely invited him and Wei Mengru to leave Dongzhou together. If he wanted to gain favor, this was the best time. Now we can just meditate and practice with peace of mind. It would be best if nothing happens. If he really comes, then we have to let him leave something behind this time. Night falls. Gu boxing wandered through the Lianji sect like a shadow, and before he knew it, he came to a large hall. Because of the Immortal Ascension conference, even at night, the Lianji sect was still busy. The bronze-colored ancient hall exuded an elegant and classical atmosphere under the snowflakes. Occasionally, disciples passed by the hall door, but they did not notice Gu boxing existence. This is a matter of course. At the peak of returning to the void, and halfway to enlightenment, his physical body can be said to be dispensable. Even if Gu boxing is really killed by someone one day, as long as there is a trace of spiritual consciousness, there is a way to be reborn. It was precisely because of his confidence in himself that he appeared in the Lianji sect at this moment. As soon as he stepped into the Liuli Palace, Gu Boxing immediately noticed a terrifying pressure of spiritual energy quietly coming from the distance. Although the other party deliberately restrained his aura, Gu Boxing was still aware of this terrifying pressure. Spirit Dragon. The previous news was indeed true, the Spirit Dragon indeed lived in Tianhe Garden. If the Qing Emperor had not left, it would mean that there were actually two great powers living in this small garden at the same time. If this news were released, I'm afraid no one would believe it. Even if he could fight with Hideo by virtue of the dynasty's national destiny and the power of all living beings, he would not dare to offend two Hideo realms at the same time. Fortunately, the person he was looking for was not Musian, but Wei Mengru. As long as Wei Mengru's spiritual consciousness is taken away, the mission will be completed. If they enter Tianhe Garden openly, such a plan will naturally not succeed. Although Wei Mengru, Qingdi, and Linglong have nothing to do with each other, those two powerful men will probably come forward to protect Musian if they do it. After all, Gu Boxing had no intention of entering this villa from the beginning. As long as he brings Wei Mengru into the dream, it will be his victory. Dream killing technique. The user who performs this technique can strangle a person in a dream without being noticed. If it is slightly changed, a person's spiritual consciousness can also be brought out of the dream. Such a secret technique, even in the Hideo realm, will not be noticed as long as you are careful, unless the other party is protecting the other party all the time. However, even if Linglong has been secretly protecting Musian, can she still take care of Wei Mengru? Gu Boxing clasped his hands together and activated the secret technique. The next moment, a wisp of rising smoke quietly floated into Tianhe Garden. In a room deep in Tianhe Garden, the cold wind blew by, and a wisp of green smoke floated silently into the room. And almost at that moment, the two people who were meditating immediately felt a slight dizziness coming on. Musian opened his eyes, turned to look at Wei Mengru, who was also awake next to him, and said softly, "Sister Mengru." Wei Mengru nodded slightly and took out the bronze mirror in her hand. As the spiritual energy of the two people was injected into the bronze mirror, almost at the same time, the queen of the demon realm, who was deep in the demon world and meditating in front of the throne, slowly opened her coquettish eyes. Wei Mengru only felt that her eyes had turned into a vast expanse of white. When her vision gradually became clearer, what appeared in front of her was no longer the room just now, but a magnificent and ancient hall. On both sides of the door of the main hall, there is a charming giant python sculpture, which gives people a great impact at first sight. Wei Mengru said softly, "Is this the place where you talk to her?" Musian nodded slightly and was about to speak. At this time, a cold and faint voice suddenly came from behind, "Little friend Mu, I never thought that you and your maid are really inseparable." The two of them turned around to look almost at the same time, and saw a man in a monk's robe standing there at the end of the corridor of the main hall. He had a smile on his face, looked quite kind, and seemed calm, a master of strategizing, and mysterious. Almost at the first glance, Wei Mengru recognized the identity of the person who came. Her eyes were slightly cold. Gu Boxing. Musian also stared at Gu Boxing, with a bit of surprise in his eyes, and subconsciously took half a step back. "Why are you here? This is obviously a dream in my magic weapon." "How did you get in?" Musian's tone was full of horror. Gu Boxing smiled lightly and said, "Dream killing technique can sneak directly into other people's dreams. No matter where you escape with your maid, I can also find it." When he said this, he looked around at the layout of the surrounding environment, and then inadvertently glanced at the two charming giant python sculptures in front of the main hall, and his eyes suddenly condensed slightly. Then, his eyes fell on Musian and said coldly, "Musian, you are indeed a spy sent by the demon world." The last time the Queen of the Demon Realm took action, he felt that something was not right, but now that he saw this hall, everything was clear. When she was in the martial arts world that day, the reason why the Queen of the Demon Realm rescued Musian was, on the one hand, to prevent the body of Doom from being taken away by the Dacian dynasty, and on the other hand, she was probably also trying to save Musian, his subordinate. This hall is obviously the layout of the demon world. It is obvious that Musian is using this magic weapon to secretly cooperate with the demon cultivators in the demon world to provide intelligence. As for the reason, it's probably because the demon world has given me some benefits. Musian's eyes were somewhat solemn and he said, "What do you want?" Gu Boxing narrowed his eyes and said with a smile, "I only want the maid next to you. Give her to me and I can keep it a secret for you. If the Liangji sect finds out that you are secretly cooperating with the demon cultivator to seek benefits, you know what the consequences will be. Even the Qing Emperor is unlikely to come forward to protect a person who cooperates with the demon cultivator." Musian frowned and said in a deep voice, "There are also good people among the demon cultivators. Why do you want to kill all the demon cultivators with one stroke?" A hat was directly placed on Gu Boxing's head. "When you tell this to the people of Liangyi sect, do you think they will listen to your explanation?" Gu Boxing sneered, and then his eyes fell on Wei Mengru. Then, he said warmly, "Young friend Mu, you also know how important the body of Doom is to the Dacian dynasty. It is also for the luck of the dynasty and for Dongzhou." Musian raised his head and said, "The Imperial Master broke into the Liangji sect without authorization. How should we explain this? Everything is for the Dacian dynasty. I believe that even if the future sect master knows about it, he will understand," Gu Boxing said solemnly. "To put it bluntly, I just want to kill first and then show off, just like that day in the martial arts world." "Does the Imperial Master really want to kill them all?" Mu Jian stood in front of Wei Mengru, but his eyes fell firmly on the man in Taoist robes in front of him. "I don't have any ill intentions towards Xiao Mu, but..." Gu Boxing changed his voice and said, "You secretly provide intelligence to the demon world, which is an act of treason. If you leave now, you can pretend that you haven't seen anything, but if you insist on going your own way..." Although he did not continue speaking, the meaning of his words was already very obvious. Musian sighed softly. "I think human monks and demon cultivators may not be able to live in harmony. The national master is too prejudiced against the demon world. What do you think, Your Majesty?" The moment the words fell, Gu Boxing's body froze almost instantly. He took Linglong and Qingdi into consideration and calculated that they could not always protect Wei Mengru secretly, but he ignored the Queen of the Demon Realm. "No. It's not that I ignored it, but that I didn't think that the Queen of the Demon Realm would come forward to help a young monk. But now..." Gu Boxing looked around in confusion and caution. After a while, when he noticed that there was still no movement in the hall, there was a hint of coldness in his eyes when he looked at Musian. "The guy who is pretending to be a ghost. Since little friend Mu doesn't want to show decency, I can only help you show decency." Gu Boxing raised his hand, and instantly, a huge palm slowly reached towards Wei Mengru's direction. And that sense of pressure hit Musian at the same time, as if he was going to suppress him directly in that big hand. As if a huge mountain was pressing down on him, Musian's legs almost fell to the ground, but he still tried his best to resist the pressure. Gu Boxing looked indifferent, looking at Musian's expression, wanting to see a look of helplessness or even despair on his face, in order to avenge the last time he was teased in the martial arts world. But his expression was still calm, and he even looked at Gu Boxing quietly under the pressure, with a mocking expression. Is this the realm of enlightenment? Such a scene made the chill in Gu Boxing's eyes become even more intense. He clenched his hands hard and felt a huge sense of pressure surge in like a sea wave. Then, the ocean-like pressure suddenly dissipated. A sexy sound of high heels hitting the ground came from the depths of the hall, and a heavy sense of pressure fell from the sky. accompanied by a soft and coquettish voice. The Imperial Master seems to have some objections to us demon cultivators. As the voice fell, the breath from Gu Boxing's body dispersed. His body froze slightly, and he suddenly raised his head and looked deep into the hall. The tall woman walked out of the hall with sexy and enchanting steps. Queen of the Demon Realm. Gu Boxing stared at the scene in amazement and said solemnly, "I have no intention of taking action against your servants. My involvement in the dynasty and the body of doom has nothing to do with you." The Queen of the Demon Realm turned her head slightly, staring at Gu Boxing with her charming and graceful eyes, with a charming smile on her face. "He is not my servant, he is." The Queen of the Demon Realm looked at Wei Mengru inadvertently and said something softly with her mouth. Warm reminder, if you find that clicking the next page will force you to jump to other websites, please use the chapter error or contact us at the bottom to inform us. We will handle it as soon as possible. Thank you for your understanding. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 312. Although the Queen of the Demon Realm did not say the next words, Wei Mengru still judged what the Queen of the Demon Realm said through the shape of the other person's mouth. "He is my Taoist companion." You don't need to think about it to know that this is what the Queen of the Demon Realm just wanted to say. If it was Bairuoxi who was in a higher rank, she would probably look at Musian resentfully at this moment, looking weak and helpless with tears in her eyes. But Wei Mengru is obviously different from others. "I'm just a maid, what's the point of provoking me?" Wei Mengru retracted her gaze silently, and then glanced at Musian inadvertently. Musian locked eyes with her for a moment, and then gave her a reassuring comforting smile. But this smile made Wei Mengru feel a little weird in her heart. She was in trouble, and Musian indirectly attracted the Queen of the Demon World to let her take action, which also meant that Musian owed a favor to the Queen of the Demon World in the future. If the Queen of the Demon Realm later uses this favor to threaten, suddenly it became an N.T.R theme. And all of this is because she is still too weak. What if she is at the peak of returning to the void now? No, even if she is at the 7th level of returning to the void, what if Gu Boxing comes today? She can protect herself on her own without any need for the Queen of the Demon Realm to take action, and there is no need for Musian to owe this favor. Wei Mengru subconsciously grasped the skirt of her skirt with her slender hands, and slowly raised her head to look at Gu Boxing. For some reason, she suddenly felt that something was not right about the aura exuding from the Grand Master of the Dacian dynasty. "Be careful," Wei Mengru suddenly sent a message to Musian. Logically speaking, Gu Boxing should have retreated when he saw the Queen of the Demon Realm, but he actually had no intention of retreating at all and seemed to intend to fight the Queen of the Demon Realm. Musian didn't say anything, but just stared at Gu Boxing. There is indeed something wrong. The gap between the peak of Hedeo and the peak of returning to the void can be said to be a day and a day. Even if the Queen of the Demon Realm who appears here is just a ray of spiritual consciousness, how can Gu Boxing be the same? Why does he still have the courage to challenge the Queen of the Demon Realm? "Your Majesty the Queen, you really value a young monk in the god-refining realm." Gu Boxing spoke slowly, "If you take Musian away, I won't stop you in any way. What do you think? It is still unknown whether the body of doom can affect the Dacian dynasty. I don't want that made for the Dacian dynasty. I can swear this." When these words fell, the avenue resonated, which also meant that what Gu Boxing said was true. In Gu Boxing's opinion, the Queen of the Demon Realm would stop him from taking Wei Mengru, and the purpose was to let the body of bad luck affect the dynasty's national destiny, and what he said was to reassure the Queen of the Demon Realm and persuade her to retreat. However, Musian on the side suddenly laughed and said, "The oath of Deo Deo may not really work. I have used Deo Deo to play word games several times in the past. The credibility of the words of the national master is not high." Gu Boxing frowned inadvertently and looked at the Queen of the Demon Realm. The Queen of the Demon Realm's purpose was firstly for Musian, and secondly to let the body of doom affect the national destiny of the Dacian dynasty. Now that he has taken 2 steps back, it depends on whether the Queen of the Demon Realm buys it or not. Musion also inadvertently looked at the Queen of the Demon Realm. Although he was sure that the Queen of the Demon Realm would take action, he could not guarantee whether the other party would accept Gu Boxing's consultation. If the Queen of the Demon Realm gives up Sister Mengru in the end, she will have no choice but to call Sister Lin Ling to come over. I wonder if Yao Meng is in the other garden now. Mu Jian thought to himself. Seeing that the Queen of the Demon Realm didn't answer, Gu Boxing was about to speak again. At this time, the Queen of the Demon Realm glanced at Gu Boxing casually with her charming eyes. When did you get the illusion that you could be on equal footing with me, or even negotiate terms, she said softly. Boom. The entire hall shook crazily in an instant, and a cruel and violent sense of coercion enveloped the entire hall. Gu Boxing is a monk who is good at deducing heavenly secrets, but he ignored the arrogance of the Queen of the Demon Realm and, an important key that he would never have thought of. Musion was not her servant, but the Taoist companion she recognized. For this reason, it is equally impossible for the maid next to Musion to be handed over to him. The aura of the entire space seemed to be deprived of it in an instant, and the roar resounded in the hall. Gu Boxing reacted very quickly, raising his hand and flying out a talisman. However, the talisman was invisibly separated by the spiritual energy, and the talisman exploded behind the Queen of the Demon Realm, with fire splashing and crackling sounds. The Queen of the Demon Realm's eyes seemed to be burning with sparks, and she was seductive and charming. He didn't even use any techniques, just the coercion of Hideo made the whole ground tremble crazily. Fiery black fire surged around the Queen of the Demon Realm, like tiny snakes, completely swallowing up the spiritual energy in the air. The spiritual energy caused her hair to rise, and she looked down at the man on the ground condescendingly. Kneel down. The overwhelming pressure of spiritual energy caused Gu Boxing's knees to fall to the ground uncontrollably, and cracks appeared on the ground. Gu Boxing was panting heavily, and his forehead was covered with beads of sweat. He gritted his teeth and had a stern look in his eyes. There is a 90% chance that the plan will succeed this time, and that is based on the absence of the Queen of the Demon World. He counted the Qing Emperor and the Spirit Dragon, but he didn't expect that the Queen of the Demon Realm was also by Musion's side. But if he retreats now, there will probably be no such opportunity in the future. The body of doom is related to the national destiny of the Dagon dynasty, and more importantly, this body of doom is likely to be related to the former owner of the World Sea. And the technique that Gu Boxing practices is originally obtained from the World Sea, and is also the technique left by the original witch in the past. The original witch is proficient in countless techniques, with strange and changeable attacks, and is proficient in deducing the secrets of heaven, alchemy, and initiating spirits of tools. Although he is not as good as the original witch, he also knows a thing or two about the technique of deducing the secrets of heaven. In the past, he had deduced the secrets of heaven once, and the result was that if he obtained the body of doom, he would have the possibility of being in harmony with the Tao. This body of doom may contain the secret of the original witch. Gu Boxing raised his head with difficulty, staring at the condescending attitude of the Queen of the Demon Realm, and slowly said, "Maybe I am not qualified enough. What if it is a great power of the Hideo realm who was in the same era as you?" He slapped the ground with a palm, and the spiritual energy in his body surged out wildly. Behind Gu Boxing, a huge shadow spread silently, gradually becoming stronger with the spiritual energy sacrificed by Gu Boxing. The Queen of the Demon Realm narrowed her beautiful eyes and looked at the twisted shadow behind Gu Boxing. Soul Summoning Technique. Soul Summoning Technique. This technique will consume more than 70% of the spiritual energy of the cauldron, and as a price, it can summon a great power of the Hideo realm. However, the difficulty of performing this technique is extremely demanding. First, it requires some immortal fate that has been obtained from the great power of the Hideo realm, and second, in order to awaken it, the other party also needs to accept the summoning. When Gu Boxing was in the World C, he had indeed gained a lot of immortality. However, the cost of this soul-calling technique is extremely high. It will consume 20% of its own spiritual energy, and it will not be able to make up for it in the future. It can be said that in order to take Wei Mengru away this time, Gu Boxing has already spent a lot of money. As long as the soul-calling master can block the Queen of the Demon Realm, he can take away Wei Mengru's spiritual consciousness. The black fog behind Gu Boxing was surging wildly, and in the black fog, a graceful black shadow appeared silently in the sight of Musian and others. Ding! It seemed that an ancient bell was ringing in the hall, and thick black fog was surging on the black shadow. Although the other party's appearance could not be distinguished through this black shadow, the spiritual energy emanating from him at this moment was no less than that of the Queen of the Demon Realm. Gu Boxing's eyes were full of fanaticism. This is the Hedeo realm, a true Hedeo realm master, who was successfully summoned after he permanently consumed 20% of his spiritual energy. Although it is impossible to achieve the true power of the Hedeo realm, it is definitely stronger than the Demon Queen's spiritual consciousness. And this is enough. After all, he has only one goal, which is to take Wei Mengru away. Gu Boxing knelt down and bowed, and piously requested, "Please stop the Demon Queen." The black shadow looked at the national teacher who summoned him. Although his eyes could not be seen, it was possible to realize that he seemed to be recalling something. On the other side, the Demon Queen let the wind blow her hair, and her charming eyes finally became more solemn. If it was her real body, she would naturally not be afraid of the Hedeo power summoned by the soul-calling technique, but now she is only a wisp of spiritual consciousness. Not far behind the Demon Queen, Musian also stared at the black shadow and Gu Boxing's fanatical look in surprise. For some reason, he always felt that the black shadow seemed familiar. Although I can't see her face, the curvature of her chest is at least C+, which is just the right level to control with one hand, and her long legs, I seem to have seen them somewhere before. At this time, Gu Boxing had slowly stood up from the ground, and a confident smile reappeared on his face, looking at Musian. "My friend Mu, it seems that you still lose." It must be said that Musian is really smart. He thought that he might start from the dream, so he made preparations early. Although I don't know why he is favored by the Queen of the Demon Realm, however, distant water cannot quench near thirst. No matter how beautiful the Queen of the Demon Realm is, her real body is far away in Bizhu, and it is impossible for her to arrive in Dongzhou so quickly. What's more, if the Queen of the Demon Realm sets foot in Dongzhou, the meaning will be completely different. Musian ignored Gu Boxing, but stared at the graceful black shadow walking slowly, and quickly recalled his memories in his mind. This figure, this breast volume, I must have seen it somewhere before. Think about it quickly. Think about it quickly. Musian's brain was spinning rapidly, and at the same time, the black mist on the black shadow was like a huge stone thrown into the lake, rippling around him. Boom! The huge spiritual energy stirred up a gust of wind, and the black shadow walked towards the direction of the Queen of the Demon Realm. At the same time, Gu Boxing was also ready to go, staring at the direction where Wei Mengru was. Once the two great masters of the Hedeo fight, it will be the best time for him to take action. The Queen of the Demon Realm looked a little gloomy, and looked at Gu Boxing coldly. She was confident in her own strength, but Gu Boxing's goal from the beginning was not her, but to hold her back. If Gu Boxing took Wei Mengru away under her nose, how disappointed would Musian be afterwards? The black fog surged wildly, and the eyes of the Queen of the Demon Realm became colder and colder. Finally, the whole hall was completely shrouded in the black fog. Seeing that the black shadow was about to attack the Queen of the Demon Realm, the next moment, Musian seemed to react, turned his head and glanced at Wei Mengru. His eyes suddenly widened, and raised his head and said, My wife, Ba, the original witch." Yes, this black shadow is the original witch, the former owner of the World Sea. The immortal fate that Gu Boxing once obtained in the World Sea was left by the original witch, so the great power of the Hedeo realm that he could awaken should naturally be the original witch. This black fog is the secret method of the southern wilderness, and it is also the secret method left by the original witch. No wonder he felt familiar, the original witch was actually Wei Mengru. She and Wei Mengru are exactly the same except for the different hair color, the size of their chests and height are exactly the same, and it is no problem to say that they are twins. The moment the voice fell, the shadow's steps stopped abruptly. She slowly turned her head and looked in the direction of Musian. After an unknown amount of time, a weak but pleasant voice slowly sounded in the hall. Mu Lang. The gentle voice echoed in the hall, and Gu Boxing's body completely froze in place. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 313. When the black figure shouted out the title Malang, the three people present, including the queen of the demon realm, fell into a brief silence. There was thick black fog everywhere in the hall, but the voice reached everyone's ears very clearly. Gu Boxing's fanatical eyes showed a hint of astonishment as he stared blankly at the person he had summoned. Mighty. Mu Lang? Who is she calling Mu Lang? Although he had vaguely guessed the answer in his heart, Gu Boxing was still in disbelief, staring at the black shadow, and then his eyes quickly fell on Musian. When he just called out original witch, the black shadow reacted, in other words, the power summoned by the soul summoning technique was the original witch. But just now the original witch shouted the word Malang. If the Mu Lang she called did not refer to other people from the outside world, then among the people present, there was only one named Mu. Gu Boxing felt ridiculous, even thinking that he was experiencing an hallucination. How could a young monk who was only 20 years old become a powerful Taoist companion? Is it possible that the other person has any special hobbies and likes her? But even so, the great power summoned by the soul summoning technique has already fallen, and it is at least 1,000 years ago. Thousands of years ago, where did Musian come from? At this moment, the hall fell into deathly silence, and black shadows walked slowly towards Musian in the thick black mist. The original witch was a woman who was full of legends throughout her life. Until she left the World Sea, no one knew her real name. Her strange and changeable attack methods and charming appearance made people call her the witch. For witch. And now, she reappears in the world in the form of a dark shadow. Looking at it like this, she seems to remember everything in the past. Musian also stared at her. Although I know she is the original witch, what exactly is going on? Sister Mengru is the original witch, and this black shadow is also the original witch. Why do two original witches with the same identity appear at the same time? And she even called me Mu Lang. He didn't know where to start vomiting in his head. Wei Mengru stood not far away, staring at the black shadow, her heart filled with confusion. Do you have your own consciousness? Musian couldn't help but ask. The original witch spoke softly, I only died physically, but my spiritual consciousness is still there. I was summoned by the soul summoning technique. Hearing this, Gu Boxing looked up at the slender black figure with excitement and said, Original witch, I am the one who summoned you, not Musian. If I go to the sea of the world in the future, I will try my best to let you be reborn, so please stop the queen of the demon realm now. However, the original witch seemed to have no fluctuations, but her quiet and calm voice slowly sounded in the hall. You were the one who summoned me, but he was the medium. When she finished speaking, her eyes fell on Musian. The queen of the demon realm narrowed her beautiful eyes, thinking about what the original witch said. Musian was also slightly startled, with a trace of doubt in his eyes. Summoning the original witch, Gu Boxing sacrificed 70% of his own spiritual energy and permanently lost 20% of his irreparable spiritual energy. He had seen this scene just now. But what is this medium? Gu Boxing, who was not far away, was also stunned. His eyes flickered slightly, as if he was thinking about what the original witch said. The medium that summons the original witch is Musian? At this moment, Gu Boxing's mind flashed rapidly, recalling everything that had happened before. If you want to invite the powerful to come through the soul summoning technique, you need two major prerequisites. One is that it requires a large amount of spiritual energy to be sacrificed, and the other is that it requires some immortal fate from that powerful person. The so-called medium refers to Gu Boxing himself. It stands to reason that only if there are no mistakes in these two steps. The medium I choose is up to me, the original witch said softly. The moment these words were spoken, Gu Boxing's pupils shrank suddenly, as if he had thought of something, and he gasped. He slowly raised his head and stared at Musian. He has received some immortal fate left by some original witches in the past, and this immortal fate is far greater than what I got, so you think of him as the medium is coming. How is that possible? His tone was full of disbelief. The techniques I practice and all the celestial connections I have were obtained in the Sea of World in the past. How can he be a person who has never been to the Sea of World? The original witch turned her head slightly and glanced at Gu Boxing, but said nothing. From the very beginning, Musian did not need to obtain any fairy fate from the original witch, because she herself was Musian's greatest fairy fate. They have been Taoist couples since the past, and Musian himself is a medium. Click. Suddenly there was a crack on the ground, and then there were more and more cracks, and they were as dense as a spider web. A black shadow emerged from the crack in the ground, and then more and more shadows seeped out from the crack in the ground silently, slowly shrouding in the direction of Gu Boxing. How is it possible? How is it possible? The original witch chose him as her medium, but she swallowed my spiritual energy. Why? Gu Boxing knelt on the ground, muttering to himself like a devout believer, watching the black shadow form a huge net to wrap himself in it. Until the end, he couldn't believe this fact. In his opinion, this was a very likely action. Even when the spirit of the Queen of the Demon Realm appeared, he was still confident that he could take away the body of doom. But the powerful man he summoned listened to Musian's words, just because of Musian's cry. The black giant net completely enveloped and wrapped Gu Boxing, and the spiritual energy was quickly passing away. But the fear in Gu Boxing's eyes gradually dissipated, turning into a kind of fanaticism, a fanaticism for power. The abilities of the original witch were strange and changeable, powerful and gorgeous. In his past memories, the only person who was proficient in several abilities at the same time and could deduce the secrets of heaven and predict the future was the leader of the Lianji sect. The original witch. Gu Boxing slowly knelt on the ground, the black giant net quietly dissolved into the ground, and the spiritual consciousness of the great Gan State Master also completely dissipated into the air. The hall was in a mess, and the black shadow stood quietly in front of Musian. Even now, he couldn't see her face, and could only feel the terrifying aura faintly emanating from her body at this moment. I thought this Gu Boxing was a bad guy at first, but I didn't expect the story behind it to be so heartwarming. Musian secretly complained in his heart. If it were placed in modern times, the title could probably be written like this: the great Gan State Master was willing to permanently consume 20% of his spiritual energy to take Wei Mengru away, but the story behind it was heartwarming. If Gu Boxing heard it, I wonder what he would think. He consumed a lot of spiritual energy and paid a huge price to summon the original witch, but it turned out that she was Musian's Taoist partner from the beginning. If he didn't have a strong enough self-regulation ability, he would probably be so angry that he would vomit blood every time he thought of this matter during cultivation in the future. At this time, the shadow of the original witch suddenly twisted slightly, and then turned into a shadow and quietly drilled into Wei Mengru's body. In Waymengru's cauldron, the obsession of the original witch was quietly wrapped in this shadow. Waymengru seemed to realize something, closed her eyes slightly, and used her spiritual consciousness to scan the obsession in the cauldron. Soon, there was a little more surprise in her eyes. "What's wrong?" Musian asked. Waymengru looked up at him. "My other obsession is being nurtured by the spiritual consciousness just now, and there is no risk of disappearing." Is it the credit of the original witch who was just summoned? Musian thought. But I don't know how Gu Boxing summoned the original witch. Obviously, the original witch's body is Waymengru. How did Gu Boxing summon another original witch? As if she knew what Musian was thinking, the queen of the demon realm's enchanting eyes flashed with a charming luster. "The original witch in your maid's cauldron was originally just an obsession, and what Gu Boxing summoned just now was probably the spiritual consciousness of that obsession, or the shell. If the original witch obsession in Waymengru's body could disappear at any time, then with the spiritual consciousness summoned by Gu Boxing earlier giving the obsession a body, the original witch obsession will no longer be at risk of disappearing. The original witch is now a true individual, just like Gong Lianyu hidden in Bairu Oxi's body, a spiritual consciousness with self-awareness." After sorting out all this, Musian's originally tense body slowly relaxed, and finally heaved a sigh of relief. "When did you get to know the original witch?" the queen of the demon realm suddenly asked. She glanced at Musian casually. "The way she addressed you just now is also quite interesting." Musian looked back at the demon queen. It must be said that she was indeed a very beautiful woman. She had stood in the world for thousands of years and her elegance remained the same. Although she did not have the innocence of a girl, her mature and seductive charm was not comparable to that of a girl. This is why Musian had always liked royal sisters in the past. They were mature, sexy, and wealthy. "Although your majesty may not believe this, I have no memory of the original witch." Musian shook his head helplessly. His eyes then fell on the maid who was wearing a yellow skirt, dressed simply but charmingly sexy, and said, "But I think your majesty should know something about Sister Mengru. Waymengru was the original witch. The demon queen should have known this when she was in the martial world. At that time in the martial world, Waymengru was stimulated by the demon queen and took Musian away from her. The power that can affect time, among the people Musian knows, there are only two. One is the chain of desolate time in Ye Lingxuan's hand, and the other is Waymengru." The queen of the demon realm glanced at Waymengru, as if she was looking through her body at a certain existence in her cauldron, and then she withdrew her gaze. Seeing that she was no longer entangled in this matter, Musian sincerely thanked her. "Thank you, your majesty, for your help this time. If it weren't for you, Sister Mengru and I would probably be in danger this time." If the queen of the demon realm hadn't taken action, Gu Boxing would not have been able to summon the original witch, and there would not have been all the subsequent events. The queen of the demon realm looked at Musian with amusement. "Among the people I know, you are the first one who dares to use me." Musian was not humble and said, "Your majesty has misunderstood. I just think that handing over Sister Mengru to people from the Dakian dynasty is not a good thing for the demon world, so I want to report it to you as soon as possible." The queen of the demon realm raised her eyebrows slightly and glanced at Musian. In the past, she would have liked the humble and respectful attitude towards her, but now, she only feels that this unfamiliarity is unpleasant. But, thinking about it carefully, it doesn't matter. If in the future, after his retreat, Musian comes to the demon world, and in this unfamiliarity and awe, he orders him to lie down obediently, and then under his surprised and expectant eyes, he licks someone's protected cake one by one. Clean. Then, tell him the truth. Tell him what happened in the past and their stories. It seems interesting to do this. The queen of the demon realm licked her red lips and looked at Musian with a smile. "I came to save you without even dealing with the demon realm's affairs. Don't you have anything to say?" Musian raised his hands and bowed, and said sincerely, This kindness to Mu will be unforgettable. If there is a need for me in the future, Mu will do his best no matter what he does. The tall demon queen gave him a meaningful look and said faintly, "You will have a chance to repay me soon. However, this will happen very quickly, and it may take half a year at the earliest. She needs to refine the essence of the first-generation demon emperor before she can leave Bizhu." The broken buildings in the main hall began to repair themselves. Upon seeing this, Musian quickly calmed down his thoughts and once again sincerely expressed his gratitude to the Queen of the Demon Realm. Then, seeing that the time was almost up, he said goodbye. After this incident, his impression of the Queen of the Demon Realm changed greatly. He could feel that the Queen of the Demon Realm really valued him, otherwise she would not have taken action so simply this time. After leaving the world in the bronze mirror, Musian opened his eyes and turned around to see Wei Mengru curled up next to him. It was already 2 o'clock in the morning, and the night was quiet. Wei Mengru seemed to have woken up later than him. At this time, her eyes were closed tightly, as if she was still in a dream. "It's a pity that there are no maid skirts in this era, otherwise I think Sister Mengru would be very suitable for it," Musian cursed in his heart, but he placed his palms unceremoniously on her slender waist, feeling the softness of Sleeping Beauty's delicate body. Wei Mengru slowly woke up from her deep sleep and turned her head to look at Musian in confusion. "Sister Mengru, how do you feel? Are you feeling uncomfortable or something?" Musian asked with concern, gently holding Wei Mengru's waist. Mr. Mu is a man of courage, so he has already begun to climb to the top while chatting with her. Wei Mengru finally came to her senses, glared at him with eyes as clear as cold pools, gently patted his dog's paws away, and broke away from his arms. He lowered his head and gently straightened his messy clothes, glanced at him, and said, "It's okay." Musian raised his head and stared at her with a touch of temptation, then, "How about we continue? After this time, I am afraid that no foreign enemy will dare to step into Tianhe Garden in a short period of time, so he can naturally feel at ease. As soon as people feel at ease, they will think about Cici." Just now he failed to go to the end with Wei Mengru because Musian had strong self-control, but now that the problem has been solved, he has no worries anymore. However, Wei Mengru had obviously completely recovered from her previous ambiguous and shy state. She just glanced at him and said calmly, "There will be a competition tomorrow, so go to bed early." After she finished speaking, she ignored Musian and quietly turned into a black shadow and disappeared from sight. At this moment, in a room deep in Tianhe Garden, the Empress of Yaokai Holy Land slowly opened her eyes. As usual, she looked like a fairy in green skirt who could not eat the fireworks of the world, cold and beautiful. And like the snow lotus on the iceberg, spotless. She turned her head slightly and looked in the direction of the Dacian dynasty. The last time Gu Boxing made a move in the martial arts world, she ignored it because she was not present at that time and she only learned about it later. But this time, does that self-righteous guy really think that he has achieved the ultimate in concealment? In the palace, the man in Taoist robes opened his eyes suddenly, spitting out a mouthful of blood, covering his chest, and gasping for air. The old emperor was sitting in front of the soft cave, meditating and practicing. He opened his eyes and turned his head to look, shocked. "Master, what's wrong with you?" Gu Boxing raised his hand and waved it gently, with a hint of fear in his eyes. "The body of doom involves many more things than you and I imagined. But this time it is not without gain. At least I know that there is a great relationship between the maid in the yellow skirt and the original witch. This is enough to show that the secrets he deduced in the past were not wrong. Through the body of doom, he can find the way to the Hedeo realm." Gu Boxing paused for a moment and continued, "Your Majesty, I want to reach the level of enlightenment. I'm afraid I'll prepare some spiritual stones this time." When the old emperor heard this, he couldn't help but frown slightly. In recent years, in order to cultivate a powerful person in the realm of enlightenment, The national treasury has almost been drained. If this continues, the people may revolt. If I can enter the realm of enlightenment, your Majesty's dream of longevity can also be realized. Gu Boxing said faintly, we have come this far, are we going to give up? If I enter the realm of enlightenment, relying on the wishes of the people, I will not be afraid even if I reach the realm of harmony. And at that time, if it is absolutely necessary, it would be okay to take away the body of misfortune as quickly as possible. Musian was lucky this time and replaced the body of misfortune into the dream at the first time. What about next time? The Emperor of Dagon's eyes flashed slightly, and finally made up his mind, and was about to nod his head in agreement. Your Majesty. At this time, a guard in the hall suddenly stepped into the Taoist temple in a hurry. Why are you so panicked and disturbed my practice? The old emperor frowned slightly and turned his head to look at the guard. The guard seemed to be calming down. After a while, he lowered his head and said, someone just came from Yaokai and has now entered the palace. Who? Gu Boxing suddenly raised his head and asked. For some reason, he suddenly had a bad feeling in his heart. The guard raised his head and looked at him, whispering. Kingdi. So, they were the protagonists all along. Author, CCC. Chapter 314. At nightfall. Musian woke up from his meditation and after confirming that Wei Mengru was not in the room, he quietly got out of bed and walked towards Bairu Oxi's room. The room was filled with purified rich spiritual energy. Musian gently pushed open the door, and the milky white chi of heaven was quietly suspended in front of Bairu Oxi, emitting a charming halo. But Musian's sight only stayed on the chi of heaven for a moment, and then his eyes fell on Bairu Oxi. She was as cold and weak as before, like a young lady who lived in seclusion. If you didn't look at her low breasts, you would probably think she was a weak and noble young lady. However, from the moment Musian entered the room, he only looked at the chi of heaven twice, and his sight couldn't help but look at Bairu Oxi's chest that could hardly be covered by the palace skirt. The chi of heaven was vulnerable in front of the low breasts. As if sensing Musian's presence, the aura of heaven in the air slowly dimmed, and then Bairu Oxi slowly opened her eyes. Mu Lang, why are you here? She looked at Musian in surprise. It was supposed to be the time of the Ascension Conference, or the final exam in modern terms, but Musian didn't go to meditate and practice in the middle of the night, but came to his room instead. He walked to the bed and sat down, smiling, don't you welcome me? Bairu Oxi shook her head gently, looking at Musian with a hint of shame in her eyes, and said softly, it's just that every time Mu Lang comes to see me, he is thinking about doing bad things, so. As she spoke, she suddenly leaned over Musian and sniffed gently, with a hint of doubt between her delicate eyebrows. It seems to smell like rouge. Bairu Oxi whispered to herself. Musian's eyelids twitched slightly, and suddenly said, by the way, I came to you for the matter of the demonic energy. As she spoke, she took out a charming purple flower from the ring. Bairu Oxi's eyes showed a trace of doubt, and she whispered, what is this? The hydrangea in the demon world, after being specially refined, can shield one's own demonic energy as long as it is carried. Musian handed the flower to Bairu Oxi, stared at her, and continued, you will use it when you encounter thunder tribulation in the future when you are refining the spirit and returning to the void. With it, no one in the sect can detect the demonic energy in your cauldron. Bairu Oxi was puzzled at first, and then after scanning the structure of the flower with her spiritual sense, she raised her head and looked at Musian in surprise, is this a magic weapon? Where did Mu Lang get it from? Musian had already thought of an excuse, and smiled, the first generation of Demon King was sealed in the pilgrimage hall before, and I happened to find this magic weapon in its ring when I went to that cave. With it, you don't have to worry about the demonic energy, and you can be at ease in refining the spirit and returning to the void in the future. Musian continued. Bairu Oxi's eyes were filled with a touch of emotion, and there was a little more tenderness in her eyes when she looked at Musian. Malang treats me so well. When she said this, she hesitated for a moment and continued, Malang, if my other spiritual consciousness awakens in the future and does something too outrageous to you, will you hate me? Musian held her hand and said softly, as long as it's Ruoxi, I don't care what she does to me. He knew by Ruoxi's love, and with this love, she would not do anything too outrageous. Whether it's by Ruoxi or Black Ruoxi, there won't be any big problems. He already knew by Ruoxi's character very well, and he had confirmed her heart with his own hands countless times in the past. Bai Ruoxi smiled sweetly, I feel relieved when Malang said that. The Sword Palace is still suspended in Dongzhou, like a suspended city. If Gong Lianyu really does something to Malang after waking up in the future, it's Gong Lianyu who did it. Miss Bai is just a good girl who has no bad intentions and knows how to feel sorry for Malang. After being intimate with Bai Ruoxi for a while in the room, Musian spoke at the right time and left the room. He didn't plan to tell Bai Ruoxi about the Tegzi pill for the time being. After all, the greater the hope, the greater the disappointment. If he really collected the medicinal materials later and could let the female emperor of Yuzhou refine the pill, it would not be too late. Although this is extremely difficult, even the queen of the demon world does not have much hope. After all, no one would want to have an existence that is equal to him or even stronger than him for no reason. Gong Lianyu is already in the Hedao realm, and his sword skills are the best in the 9 states. And the existence of the 9-tailed fox will definitely be promoted to the Hedao in the future. The combination of the two physiques is not the result that the Hedao masters want to see. After returning to the room, Musian took out the storage ring of the first generation of demon emperors and was about to start studying the Tianhuang technique. At this time, he suddenly saw a paper crane that had stopped by the table. Is it the paper crane of the senior sister? Or the sister of the sect master? Musian's eyes flickered, and he opened the paper crane and took a look. My brother's performance today was quite satisfactory. I hope to see you in the finals of the Ascension Conference later. Musian pondered for a moment, then started writing, to be honest, it was a bit dangerous to win today. I have lost confidence. I think the Ascension Conference is just a game for my senior sister, but I am only a 4th grade soul refiner. I am afraid. He paused and continued to write, speaking of which, I have heard that if you can have incentives when you encounter difficulties, you can burst out more than your own strength. The hints should be enough here. I hope Xiaolian doesn't know what's good for her. Musian fully demonstrated what it means to be timid offline and strike hard online. He is very friendly to senior sister in person, but calls her Xiaolian in private. He folded the paper crane and threw it out of the window, and then took out the ring left by the first generation of Demon King. After calming down a little, Musian closed his eyes slightly, and the practice method of Tianhuang Gongfa and its introduction at the beginning slowly emerged in his mind. This Gongfa can burn the cauldron when the spiritual energy is burning, so that the spiritual energy can refill the cauldron in an instant. While quietly comprehending the practice method of Tianhuang Gongfa, Musian suddenly caught a more sensitive word. He slowly opened his eyes and looked at the ring in his hand in surprise. Heaven. According to the introduction of this Gongfa, this Tianhuang Gongfa was left from the heavenly court in the past. However, there is always a feeling that the heavenly court and the immortal realm have the same purpose. Musian looked at the ring in his hand and fell into deep thought. According to legend, after a cultivator has cultivated to the extreme, he can ascend to the immortal world and transcend the mundane world. However, this legend has always been regarded as a lie by cultivators. Because the great powers of the Hedao realm have integrated the great Dao and are the strongest in the world, and are also the limit of cultivators. But even those great powers of the Hedao realm have never seen anyone ascend to the immortal world. It is not that they cannot ascend, but that the immortal world does not exist at all. But if so, what is this heaven? The first generation of demon kings was a great hero, and the skills he practiced actually originated from the heaven? Muzian clenched the ring slightly, stood up, and left the room. He had never heard of such a place as the heaven in ancient books, but Yao Meng had experienced many things before becoming a Taoist, and perhaps she would know about this. Dong dong. Muzian knocked on the door. Fairy sister. There was no response. Normally, if it were usual, the door would have been opened by now. Yao Meng. Still no response. Muzian pushed open the door, and the room was empty. Although I know that the fairy occasionally has her own things to deal with, it is still a bit rare not to see her this evening. Window. Tabula equals window. Tabula. Tabula.push, mode, thumbs feed -01, container, tabula below article feed, placement, below article feed, target. Type, mix. Could it be, she went back to Yaokai? But if she really wanted to go back to Yaokai, she should have told me. It should be something urgent, Muzian pondered for a moment, and finally chose to go back to the room temporarily and concentrate on practicing Tianhuan Kung Fu. It was night. It was snowing outside, and the cold winter was coming. Ya Lingxian stood in front of the bed, looking at the snowy scenery in the courtyard through the window, and exhaled slowly. This is the first day of the Ascension Conference. For the Saint of the Forbidden Zone, it is not difficult to advance. It is a very simple thing. With the ancestral artifact, the chain of desolate time, she can fight against it even if it is across the realm. Moreover, she has comprehended a trace of Taoism. No one in the world can stop Ya Lingxian except those destiny protagonists. However, such a girl looks depressed at this moment, as if she is worried about something, so that her pretty face reveals a trace of embarrassment. Ya Lingxian sat in front of the window-sill, turning the pen in her hand, and said, "Sister Siyu, if I help secretly, will Brother Mu hate me?" Before the bed behind Ya Lingxian, Siyu, with her brown hair, swung her tender white thighs, gently stroked Yechian who was taking a nap on her legs, looked at Ya Lingxuan's back leisurely, squinted and smiled. "When you asked me this question, you already had the answer in your heart, didn't you?" Gu Boxing's means were really amazing. He blocked the secrets of heaven, hid his breath, and sneaked into the glazed palace silently. It was a perfect and profound stealth method. But the Reincarnation Queen and Ya Lingxian shared the same physique. As early as when Gu Boxing stepped into Tianhe Garden, the Reincarnation Queen had already told Ya Lingxian about this. She was not worried that Muzian would have problems, but she was a little dissatisfied with the ill-intentioned national teacher. However, if she took action, she was worried that Muzian would think that she was interfering too much and disliked her for meddling in other people's business. Yesiu said hey and smiled, "Your brother Mu is such a thin-skinned guy, let alone helping him secretly, he might even accept the imperial-level medicinal materials you gave him directly. Besides, you are Taoist companions, it is normal to help each other. Didn't he give you the dragon whiskers and enlightenment seeds in your body?" Yesiu continued. However, Ya Lingxian was still a little hesitant and said distressedly, "But I have done a lot of things secretly before, what if I am discovered? If Brother Mu knew that I had secretly threatened Gongsun Chen before, and that I had extended the third prince's confinement from 3 years to 10 years, and that I had secretly driven away several female disciples who wanted to pursue him, and that I had taught Gu Boxing a lesson behind his back this time, I had done so many things on my own initiative, what if he hated me?" Yesiu. She was speechless for a moment. Then, a hint of jealousy appeared in Yesiu's tone. "Even I envy that guy a little. Anyway, you decide for yourself, I don't think that guy would mind such a small matter." Ya Lingxian raised her head and thought for a long time, then turned her head to look at the mature and sexy Sanwu Yuja in a plain robe. "What do you think I should do?" The reincarnated queen looked calm. "You decide. Then teach him a profound lesson," Ya Lingxian said. "As for other things, don't do them for the time being, the Dogon dynasty cannot be destroyed now, and its death will affect the fate of Dongzhou. Before the next Dogon emperor takes the throne, let's keep it as it is for the time being. The sky gradually brightened. Wei Mengru slowly opened her eyes in the darkness. The charcoal fire in the house had gradually burned out. She pushed open the window, breathed in the cool air, and felt gradually awake. Recalling what happened last night, Wei Mengru still felt unreal. If it weren't for Gu boxing, she might have really slept in Musian's room last night. That guy probably deceived by Ruoxi in the same way last time, Wei Mengru thought. This feeling is so beautiful, like having my own body. At this time, she suddenly heard a nostalgic and gentle voice coming from the bottom of her heart. Wei Mengru was stunned at first, then reacted and whispered, "You woke up? How do you feel now?" "It's okay now," the voice of the original witch sounded gently in Wei Mengru's heart, with a bit of emotion in her tone. "I didn't expect you to find my spiritual consciousness so quickly." "It's not us, it's Gu boxing," Wei Mengru said. "Where is Mu Lang? I want to see him," the original witch said. Wei Mengru couldn't help but think of what happened yesterday, and said uncomfortably, "He should be meditating and practicing, so it's better not to disturb him." However, the original witch just said meaningfully, "You are just embarrassed to see him now because of what happened to him last night." Wei Mengru remained calm, her voice was cold and pleasant. "I just don't want to disturb his practice, and there are 3 competitions today, so I'd better concentrate on dealing with these things first. I want to see him, I haven't seen him for a long time." The gentle voice of the original witch sounded in Wei Mengru's heart. At this moment, Wei Mengru's heart suddenly surged with an inexplicable nostalgia, which made her heart feel empty and sad, and then soon a strong desire surged in her heart, want to see him. Her eyes were slightly dazed. This is the obsession of the original witch, which indirectly affected her without even attaching to her. Wei Mengru calmed down a little and whispered, "I know. Can you control my body directly now?" The next moment, Wei Mengru relaxed her spiritual consciousness, and soon she felt that something seemed to be controlling her body. The black robe wrapped around her body, outlining her tight and beautiful figure. Most of her face was hidden under the black hood, revealing a strand of silver hair. She raised her eyes and looked out the window. "What's wrong?" Wei Mengru asked. "The Green Emperor is back," the original witch whispered. Her silver eyes stared out the window, and soon she saw Fairy Yao Meng, who had just returned to the villa. She was not touching the ground, and every inch of her skin was a little bright, like a fairy who did not belong to the mortal world, subtle and soft, shrouded in fairy mist. She looked calm, as if she had just gone out to relax before. As if she had noticed the gaze of the original witch, Yao Meng turned her head slightly, with a trace of surprise in her eyes, and said with her red lips, "Have you recovered?" The original witch in the past was just a wisp of obsession, but now she is clearly a spiritual consciousness rather than an obsession. Obsession will soon disappear between heaven and earth, but spiritual consciousness will not. The original witch nodded gently, "It's almost done." Yao Meng's eyebrows were relaxed, and her body seemed to be accompanied by the moonlight, and she smiled, "That's good. In the past, he was always worried about you. Now it's good. He can also be with me at ease." The moment the voice fell, the outside of the house fell into silence. Yao Meng seemed not to notice, and turned around and planned to leave. The original witch said faintly, "I have been his lover since the past. Fairy Yao Meng should not interfere in the relationship between me and him, so as not to be laughed at by the world. What this means is that we were Taoist companions in the last life, and I was the first in terms of feelings. What are you?" However, she obviously underestimated Yao Meng. This elegant fairy glanced at the original witch calmly, with a gentle luster in her eyes. "I don't know if you came first in the previous life. But I know that in this life, I am the one who came first."